I'm a park ranger, but I'm leaving my name and the name of the park out of this post intentionally. The names of all those involved have been changed as well. I needed to get this story out there but cannot rely on conventional avenues. That's why I'm posting it here. I could lose my job, or much worse, but this story has to be told. I owe it to Catherine, not her real name. I arrived at the ranger station like any other day. I was given my section of the park to patrol. Unfortunately, the park is massive and my section usually includes half of it, so there isn't much chance for leisurely strolls on the trails. I hopped in my work vehicle, a 10-year-old 4x4, and headed out to see if anyone needed assistance. It didn't take long to find someone. At the first campground, there was a man who couldn't get his camper started. A quick jump got him rolling along. Next was a couple needing directions. Then an overturned canoe. I had only made it a few miles through the park. I was going to have to move if I hoped to make a full route today. I managed to grab a few quick bites of lunch and put some miles on, without anyone needing help when the call came over the radio. There was a hiker that found something and I needed to go check it out. A half hour later, I was talking to a middle-aged woman who had made a concerning discovery. She found a hat and a note on the trail. I read the note. I'm writing this note and leaving it behind because I'm not sure what's happening. The 5 of us friends have been planning this trip forever, even since long before we graduated, but it always seemed like something came up at the last minute, and one or more of us couldn't go. For a while, I was almost convinced that some outside force was working against us, that we were cursed not to go camping together until we were all too old to enjoy it. I could picture Devin now. He would still go even if he was so old he had to use a walker on the trail. He's always up for camping. I think the guy carries a loaded backpack in his car with him everywhere he goes. Adrian got here right behind us, followed soon after by Dean. Of course, Terry was the last one to show. We started up the trail in great spirits. 3 miles and the sun was just starting to heat up. We were making good time towards the rustic campground when Devin decided to take a detour. He said he'd heard about an old trail that no one used anymore and wanted to check it out. I said we should keep going the way we were, but I was outvoted. I honestly don't think Terry's vote should have counted, since he was obviously stoned and Devin just bullied him into saying yes. We came to a spot with a large stone off to the side of the trail. Devin said it was the trailhead, but I didn't see any trail. He led us through some heavy brush, but on the other side it cleared out and we could see the faint impression of an overgrown trail. I went last and left my hat on the stone in case we got lost and needed to be rescued. I think that's exactly where we're heading, straight toward Lost. I'll leave this note under my hat and hope that someone finds us. I asked the woman to show me where she'd found it, and she showed me. 3 miles later, I was staring at the rock I hoped I would never see again. I radioed my location to the station and told them if they didn't hear from me in a couple of hours to send a search party to the old abandoned trail. I wished I would have brought my supplies with me, my backpack, and my sidearm, but they were 3 miles away and I didn't know how long these kids had been on this trail. I knew that wasted time could mean the difference between life and death. At least I had my knife, flashlight, and binocs. So I thanked the woman, placed the red hat back on the stone just in case, and headed into the heavy brush. Once through the initial overgrowth, the trail became visible. Old memories flashed through my head, ones I never wanted to think of again. I took a deep breath and headed down the trail. It was overgrown for the first mile or so and then it opened up into a field. I could see people had walked through before me by the way the weeds were partially trampled. As I walked through, a deer jumped ahead of me, startling me. Until that moment, I didn't realize how jumpy I was. I tried to settle down and tell myself that these kids were just lost and I could catch up to them and get them out. Telling myself that didn't make the memories go away. I entered a clearing with a fallen log and another note with a rock sitting on it. I think I'm being silly. This trail isn't so bad. Maybe I was wrong. Devin seems to know where he's going. I just can't shake this feeling that we're being watched. Sometimes I'll look around, and I swear I see a face disappear behind a tree. Am I being paranoid? Maybe if the birds would start singing again that would lighten my mood, but I haven't heard a bird or any other animal for a while. I wonder why they're being so quiet. Are they afraid of us? On another note, Terry seems to be brooding more than usual. Maybe he forgot to bring enough of his stash to last the trip. Devin is in his glory since everyone has to rely on him for directions. Adrian, Ann, and Dean seem to be along for the ride, although I have noticed Dean looking around at the trees as well. Maybe I'll ask him if he sees anything. If you're trying to track us down, I hope we aren't being too much bother. I just have this feeling. I folded the note and stuck it in my pocket, then prayed she was wrong about being followed. I pushed on, beginning to miss my backpack with the supplies in it, especially the water bottles. The trees provided some shade so the sunlight wasn't shining directly on me, but hiking is always thirsty work. The birds chirping in the trees made me almost forget about the desperate mission I was on to save these 5 kids. My mind wandered back to the kid I couldn't save. It had been shortly after I started as a park ranger. An 11-year-old boy had gotten lost on this very trail. His parents searched frantically for him before calling us in to look. I remember hoping to be the one to find him as we formed search parties and searched on, in, and around every inch of the trail. In the end, I got my wish. I found him, but I wish I hadn't. I pushed the memory to the back of my mind and focused on the trail. It was starting to fade. The trampling of feet wasn't making enough of a difference, and I was starting to lose my way. Out here, that can be deadly. I kept moving forward and finally regained the trail just in time to reach the fork. I looked back and forth from one choice to the other and couldn't see a difference between the two. I searched for any broken twigs or plants that would give me a hint, but there were none. Just when I was about to give up and flip a coin, I saw a piece of paper in the weeds barely visible. I dug it out and read it. It seems like we have a dilemma, a fork in the road as it were. You would think I would be happy to see the doubt in Devin's eyes as he looked from one choice to the other, but you'd be wrong. It made my confidence plummet. It made me think that we were never getting out of here. Everyone's running out of water. Devin yelled at us for not conserving, but I saw him drink the last of his 2. He ranted and raved at us for a while, but we all knew that he was just mad because he didn't know what to do. In the end, he flipped a coin. We all did our best not to laugh. Adrian is reaching the end of her rope with Devin and his attitude. Dean has been playing peacemaker, trying to keep them from going at it too much. Terry has been way too quiet. I haven't seen him light up once. Something's up with him, but every time I ask, he says it's nothing. The birds still aren't singing, and it's starting to really bother me. The strange feeling I have hasn't gone away. I asked Dean if he had seen anything strange, but he won't talk about it. We've been on this trail for a while. I'm hoping to come to the end soon. By the way, in case the note got moved or blown around, we took the left trail. I was panicked by the end of reading that note and so relieved she mentioned which trail to take. I radioed in and reported that I was on the trail of the missing hikers. I mentioned the fork and taking the left side. I was told that there was no search party going on yet, that I was the only one looking for these kids. It was the complete opposite of years ago looking for that kid. Everyone was searching. I know we combed every inch of that wilderness, but that's the thing about the woods. You can search every nook and cranny, but something can still stay hidden. The sun was going down, and I still had no idea how close I was to catching up to these kids. I could stumble across them in the next clearing, or they could be hours ahead of me. I met with the woman who showed me the hat and note in the afternoon. If they started out around daybreak, they could be a good 5 or 6 hours ahead of me. If the leader is so driven to continue, it's hard to say how far they might be. I continued following the trail until I came to a fallen tree across a river. I looked both ways along the edge of the water, but saw no trail, so I made my way across the tree. I could picture the debate the kids had when they got here. I chuckled at the thought of Devin having to convince them to go across. I believe I made up a lot of time with that single crossing. I jumped down to the water and drank my fill, then climbed back up feeling much better. It was tough to pick up the trail on the other side. I was glad to find a note sticking to a branch. Oh my gosh, Devin just about came unglued when we got to that tree over the river. He hopped up on it right away and started across, but the rest of us weren't so sure the trail led that way. We asked him how a trail could be planned with a fallen tree as part of it. He sputtered and stomped and told us how lost we'd be without him. Dean had finally had enough and told him we were lost because of him. I seriously thought Devin was gonna take a swing at him until Terry of all people came to his side and told Devin to shut up. The rest of us all came together and told Devin he could keep leading us as long as he stopped acting like a petty tyrant. He didn't take it well. In the end, he told us we could all go to hell. He sat on the log and refused to move. Eventually, after we took a break and refilled our water bottles in the river, Dean said we should get going and led us across the tree. Devin followed along acting like a whipped puppy. Dean and I talked about the disappearing face we'd seen a while back, but neither of us had seen it again. At least the birds are back to singing. I chuckled, figuring that Devin would be a big baby over the whole thing, but after the chuckle came concern. Deposed leaders are usually dangerous. I wondered how much offense Devin had taken and if he would be looking to get some payback in some small or large way. Darkness was coming on fast in the woods. I had to make a decision, camp for the night or keep going. If I camped, I could defend against the predators that lurked in the darkness, but if I kept moving, there was a good chance I could stumble across the group before daybreak. It wasn't much of a decision. These kids that I didn't even know, that I had plunged headfirst into the woods without even my backpack of supplies. Of course, I was going to try to catch up with them. If I had done that years back, would that kid still be alive? Such thoughts nagged at me. Most days I kept them at bay, but here in this same forest, close to the spot where I found him, I needed to focus. If I'm going to keep after them, then I need to get going. I stepped off the trail to take a piss and heard a metallic snap at the same time. I felt intense pain shoot up my leg. I looked down and I had stepped into a bear trap. I screamed, fell to the ground, and rocked back and forth in agony. After a few minutes, I focused on getting the trap off my leg. I found a branch and pried the trap open, screaming the entire time. I managed to pull the trap off my leg and threw it to the side. I really didn't want to take my boot off, but I had to see the damage. It took every ounce of effort I could muster to unlace the boot and pull it off. My leg was purple. I felt along the wound very gently, but there didn't seem to be any break. That didn't mean I wasn't going to be limping for the next month, but it did mean I would buy this brand of boots for the rest of my life. It took much more effort and some more screaming to put the boot back on, but I knew I needed to keep moving. I laced up the boot and found a sturdy branch to use as a crutch. I struggled to my feet and took my first few ginger steps. Once I got into a rhythm, it got easier, but I couldn't walk as fast as I had been. Of course, when I was at my weakest was when I heard footsteps in the trees close to me. I knew there was a predator around just because it could sense I was vulnerable. I leaned against a tree and held my crutch ready as a weapon. The footsteps came closer. They paused as if they knew I was ready, then slowly continued stalking me. They were deliberate but slow. Each step seemed measured, as if waiting for the right moment to strike. I heard it right next to the tree I was hiding behind. I whipped around as best I could and raised my crutch to strike. A deer stared at me for a heartbeat and then turned and ran through the forest. I collapsed against the tree and slid down to the ground, allowing the adrenaline to bleed off. I don't remember falling asleep. I woke to sandpaper scraping the side of my face. I opened my eyes and there was a bear beside me, licking my cheek. I freaked out, screamed, and rolled away from it. The bear wasn't ready for that reaction. It startled and ran away. I slowed my rapid breathing and looked around. It was dark. There were thin shafts of moonlight beaming through the trees, providing a little light. I checked my watch and it was nearly 4 in the morning. I rose slowly and gingerly on my injured ankle, took the small flashlight out of my pocket, and prayed it still worked. My prayers were answered when the beam shone brightly through the woods. I panned around trying to get my bearings. After a moment, I found the trail and started hobbling toward it. The nightly noises were a comfort. At least if the crickets were chirping and the rest of the forest was singing its nightly tune, that meant predators weren't around. I stumbled and fell, hitting my injured ankle against a rock. The pain overwhelmed me and I screamed. After a few minutes of recovery, I got up and continued at a slower pace, paying more attention to the ground. I chided myself for falling asleep and losing so much time. At least the trail was easy to follow. I continued on through the night, hoping I wasn't too late. I started thinking about the boy I'd failed to rescue and what would happen if I failed to rescue these kids. I'm sure the Rangers department would say I did my best. I wasn't worried about them, it was me. Would I be able to forgive myself for letting something happen again? My thoughts were interrupted when I stumbled into a clearing. Not just any clearing. There were the remnants of a fire. There were impressions from tent pegs being pulled out of the ground. All around were the signs of a very recent campsite, including a tent that was still set up. I got so excited, I nearly fell over my crutch looking around for signs of anything. The tent was a mixed blessing. It was very ominous that it was still here while the others were gone, but I was able to find some supplies to take along for my search. The most important was food. I shoved some protein bars in my pocket while devouring some beef jerky. I also grabbed 2 bottles of water from the pack. I stumbled across a note sitting under a rock beside the smoldering fire. Before I sat, I held my hand out to the fire. It was still warm, but the embers were nearly dead. It had been hours since it was first lit. If I hadn't taken my unintentional nap, I would have caught up with them. There was nothing I could do but sit by the dying fire and read the note, hoping there was good news. We found this clearing and decided to camp. Everyone was tired from walking and the mood was somber because no one seemed to know where we were. All of us had been hiking in this forest before, but none of us had ever seen or heard of this trail. We set up our tents and started a fire, then had some supper and sat around. No one really felt like talking, so I tried to get the ball rolling by asking Terry why he was late. He hesitated, but at my prompting eventually, he told us that he had hit an animal with his car on the way here. I asked if it was a deer and he said no, it was much too big to be a deer. He said it walked upright on 2 legs and it was massive, like 8 feet tall, covered in brown hair. He swerved to miss it, but the strangest thing was it seemed to try to jump in front of him anyway, like it wanted him to stop. We all listened with rapt attention. Just then, off in the distance, we heard a scream. We all froze. Devin started spouting off and yelling at Terry for trying to scare us. Then he stormed off. Dean tried to stop him, but he pushed him away and disappeared in the woods. The rest of us talked, trying to decide if we should go look for him, but in the end, we figured we should just let him go and cool off. A short while later, we heard a rustling off in the distance and a muffled cry. We huddled a little closer together and went on high alert. Our eyes darted back and forth as we searched the impenetrable wall of trees surrounding us, looking for any sign of a predator. Right then, the strangest thing happened. All the nightly noises stopped. The crickets, the squirrels, the owls, every sound that you usually hear in the forest at night simply ceased. It was unnerving. For a moment, I wondered if I hadn't gone deaf. Our eyes darted all around in the darkness. We all huddled closer to the fire. Dean pulled out his hunting knife. None of us said a word. It was like if we spoke, something bad would happen. Somehow whatever caused the noises to stop would find us if we spoke. Someone did speak though, just not who we expected. "Why are you here?" came a raspy, deep voice that seemed to echo from everywhere. We looked all around and finally, a man stepped into the light. He was large, well over 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and older, maybe in his 50s or 60s. He was also wearing a park ranger's uniform. It looked old and shabby, like he had been wearing it for a long time. There were no name tag or park patches. At that point, we didn't care. We had been rescued. We clamored around him saying how glad we were that he had found us. We told him about going on the trail and how we weren't sure where we even were. The man listened, then slowly said, "You shouldn't be here." We all looked at each other. I'm sure the others thought the same as me. "No shit, we shouldn't be here. We just told you that." He continued to look at us from one to the other as though sizing us up. I was starting to get a little uncomfortable with his silence. I would have thought he would offer to guide us, but he didn't. He kept staring. I think everyone else was getting a little edgy as well when Dean asked if he could point us in the right direction. He looked at Dean as if deciding to answer him or not. "I can guide you," he said, "but first you should have some rest." We all agreed that the day had been long and stressful. We decided to take his advice and turn in. We offered him some food and water, but he refused, saying he wasn't hungry. We each went to our tents and laid down. Before I settled in and finished this note, I popped my head back out of my tent to check on our guide. He was sitting by the fire staring into the orange coals. I thought I heard him mumbling or maybe humming something softly. I quietly zipped up my tent and went to sleep. Sometime later, someone banged on my tent. I woke and unzipped it to find the ranger with a strange look in his eyes. "We need to go." "Why?" I said, rubbing the sleep out of my eyes. "It's not safe here," he said with an edge of panic in his voice. I popped back into my tent to change, then came out and met with everyone. They were all in states of semi-consciousness as well. Everyone but the ranger seemed to be confused. "Pack up, we need to leave," he said a little more forcefully. I was about to protest when I heard a piercing scream in the distance. His head shot up and he stared in the direction of the sound. "Move it," he said. "Pack up." We didn't need to be told again. The scream brought us all fully awake. We tore down our tents in record time and packed everything into our backpacks. As I was finishing up, I noticed Devin's tent was still up. "Where's Devin?" I said. "Who's Devin?" the ranger said. "He's another one of our friends," I said. "He went off into the woods alone right before you got here." "He didn't come back," the ranger said. "Should we go look for him?" I said. The ranger extended his arms and did a slow circle. "Which way would you go?" he said. I understood his point. How would we know where he had gone, if he was still on the path or not? It just seemed like we should do something. "What about his gear?" I said. "Do we take it with us?" The ranger looked at me like he was annoyed at having to answer such questions. "Leave it here in case he comes back," he said. "He'll need his supplies." I'm not sure if I'll keep leaving notes or not now that we have the ranger to guide us. Whoever finds this, please look for Devin and make sure he's okay. A ranger. All the rangers at this park are in their 30s or 40s. Maybe it was someone who retired and was just roaming around out there. But why would he be in a ranger outfit? Sitting here by the dying embers of the fire with a tent set up in front of me, it was very tempting to take a rest. If they're in the hands of a capable ranger, I could get some rest before the long hike back out of here, but I knew I had already taken my rest for the night. If not for that, I would have been here hours ago, probably before the other ranger. I set out again feeling tired, but determined. The campsite made me more hopeful than I had been all day. At least they were together and thinking like campers. If only I knew who this ranger was. The sun was an hour away from rising, so I took out my flashlight to follow the trail. I zipped up the tent before I left, just in case its owner did come back. Wouldn't want animals getting in and taking everything. It's bad enough when injured park rangers do it. The trail stayed level for a while as dawn peeked over the trees. The trail started heading upward, which was bad news for me and my bum ankle. It made things harder, but I had my trusty makeshift crutch to help me. Dawn crept into the forest, giving me a little assistance. At least I wouldn't have to waste a hand holding a flashlight. As the climb grew steeper, the trail grew more narrow. At times it was only the width of 1 foot. I held onto trees and whatever I could as I scaled the extremely narrow trail. At the most difficult, I paused and seriously considered turning back. As I looked around for any other way to keep going, I saw brightly colored fabric at the bottom of the ravine. I carefully balanced as I took out my binoculars and looked. It was a backpack and attached to it was the body of a girl in her early 20s. She looked like she had hit her head on the rocks at the bottom. Her face was bloody and mauled. Her clothes were ripped and soaked in blood. There was no doubt an animal had gotten to her. The only question was she alive when it started feeding on her? I looked away but felt my determination double to find these missing kids. They might be with a ranger, but they were still in terrible danger. I slowly continued up the narrow trail. At times I was sure the ground would give out from under me and I would share the same fate as the poor unfortunate girl at the bottom of the ravine. It was then I remembered my radio. I tried to call in and report the location of the body, but the only response I got was static. I determined to try again when I got to the top of the trail. It was yet another motivation to keep going, to be careful, to survive. It seemed like hours at a snail's pace working my way up the side of that ravine. Finally, I clawed my way over the edge to the top. I rolled over onto solid ground and lay there for a few minutes. Once I caught my breath, I got up slowly and painfully. I hadn't done my ankle any favors. I limped toward what looked like the trail and began following. It wasn't long before I came across the remnants of another campsite. The fire was a little warmer than the last one. I stoked it up, threw some more wood on, and got it going. I knew I needed some rest. I searched around and found a note, then sat down on a log by the fire to read it. I can't believe Adrian's gone. We started up this steep ravine and the trail kept getting more narrow. I asked the ranger if there was any other way around, but he just glared at me and said, no. We all struggled with our heavy packs on our backs. At one point I was on all fours, just trying to keep from sliding into the ravine. That's when it happened. Adrian was having trouble keeping her feet on the trail. She kept slipping. I reached out and helped her balance a few times. Being right in front of me, I kept an eye on her whenever I could. That wasn't nearly as much as I wanted because I was watching my own feet. She slipped once and I tried to grab her, but she had tipped over and the weight of her backpack dragged her over the side. I watched in horror as she tumbled down into the ravine, bouncing off trees as she went. I saw her skull make a solid impact several times as she tumbled to the bottom and slid to a stop. I couldn't see if she was still breathing or not as I called her name. She didn't move. I called for the ranger in front of us and pointed to her unmoving body. He stared at her for a long time. I don't know if he was trying to see if she was alive or not. He told us to keep going up the trail to the top and he would go check on her. I watched as he carefully made his way down the nearly sheer slope. We kept moving forward as instructed. He was only halfway down when we made it to the top. I was a wreck. I was so happy we made it, but sad for Adrian. I didn't hold out much hope that the ranger was going to come trotting into camp with her on his back, saying she only had a few bumps and bruises. We started a fire and then sat around it in a stupor. Finally, Terry came over and talked to me. Look, I understand she was your friend, but she was ours too, he said. We need to work together to get out of here, for them. That's so stupid it makes sense, I said with the remnants of a smile. It was then the ranger reappeared. He sat by the fire and didn't say a word. There was something in his eyes. It wasn't sadness, but I don't know exactly what it was. We knew she wasn't coming back. We rested for a little while, then started out on the trail again. If you're following us, I hope you're being careful. Stay safe. Wow, this girl is something else. With all she's gone through, she still wants me to be safe. I hope I find her. I think she'd make a good ranger. My guilty conscience jumped up on my back and yelled at me. How can you sit around and rest when that poor girl just lost her friend and needs your help? I knew it was right. I just didn't know why that other ranger was being so careless. I struggled to get up, kicked out the fire, and started after them. The daylight was dimming, but it was only 8 in the morning. I looked up and saw why. Storm clouds were overtaking the sky. Yet another reason I wish I would have brought my backpack. The raindrops hit like a cold slap in the face. Even though it was still September, out here in the mountains, the weather can change in a heartbeat. We weren't at the top of the mountain, but in the middle was enough for the weather change to make me shiver. Now that we were out of the ravine, I tried my radio again, but it was just static. I knew there were some places where the radio inexplicably wouldn't work. I just hoped to get away from the interference before it was too late. The trail was clear in front of me, but that was little comfort when walking in open fields with no rain cover. All those trees I tromped through, and now in the rain, I have wide open spaces. I'd say someone doesn't like me. The rain didn't just pass like a spring shower, it poured so hard it became difficult to see in front of me. For a long time, I trudged through the rain. At times it felt like I was walking in place. The mud was starting to cake on my boots, and then my salvation appeared. In front of me on the trail was a tent. I called out before I unzipped the tent and let myself in. I flopped to the wonderful dry floor, then quickly turned and zipped the entrance back up. I breathed a sigh of relief, but as I did, a stench assaulted my nose. I looked over at the sleeping bag. It was full. I'm sorry to barge in like this, but I needed to get out of the rain, I said. No response. I nudged the person in the bag. It tipped to the side and rocked right back. That's when I noticed the splotches of red that had soaked through the bag. I didn't want to see, but I pulled the top of the sleeping bag away from the person's face. The bad part was they no longer had a face. It had been ripped away and the neck had been gouged out. There were large wounds on the body as well. I tried to feel for a pulse, but when my fingers went straight into the muscles of the neck, I figured there was no pulse to feel. I wiped my fingers on the sleeping bag and pondered why this person was covered. I know the animal who did this didn't gently cover up the person with a sleeping bag when it was done. I found my answer laying above the head of the person. It was a note. I can't believe Terry's dead. I wish I'd never come on this trip. I wish I'd never let Devin bully us into turning down this damn trail. Where the hell is Devin anyway? When he stormed off on his little pity party, did he run across whatever creature has been stalking us? Is he sitting back in his tent now enjoying himself? I really don't know. We were enjoying not climbing up the face of a ravine, but we were very tired. I mentioned stopping and camping for a little bit to the ranger. He looked around and even sniffed the air. That seemed like a weird thing to do, but after that, he agreed to let us set up camp. He even told us to do it as quickly as we could. We gathered wood for a fire, but he told us not to bother because the rain was coming. I guess that explains the sniffing the air thing. Our tents had been up maybe 15 minutes when it started raining. It quickly turned into a downpour. We all offered the ranger to sit in our tents with us. He looked over us one by one. It was kinda creepy. Finally, he said he would sit with Terry in his tent. Dean and I looked at each other with relieved expressions. The ranger is helping us, but he isn't someone I'd like to ever see again. He just acts too weird. At times, I wonder if he's really helping. I just closed my eyes listening to the rain on the tent and letting it carry me off to dreamland when the ranger ripped open my tent. He said we needed to pack up and leave right now, that something was hunting us. We dove out into the rain and miserably packed our tents. He reassured us that there was a cave nearby and we could get shelter there. As I was packing up, I didn't see Terry, so I went over to his tent and knocked. When there was no answer, I went in and found what was left of his body. Something had torn him to shreds. I covered my mouth to keep from vomiting and ran out to tell the others. Dean and the ranger looked in and saw that there was no helping him. The ranger said he had left the tent to go to the bathroom, and when he came back, he saw a predator hanging around the tents. That's when he came and woke us. It must have already gotten to Terry. I pulled his sleeping bag over his head and wished we had time to give him a proper burial, but the ranger said the animal might be back for the rest of us, so we quickly packed and left. I barely had time to finish this note. Please help us. A cave. What kind of ranger is he? Doesn't he realize that would be the most likely place a large predator would call home? I thought for a moment what cave he could be talking about. I hadn't been on this trail for 5 years, ever since I found the kid here. Then it hit me, we were very close to the place where we found him. Why would he take them there unless... I jumped up so quickly that I nearly fell on top of the body when I forgot and put too much weight on my injured ankle. I hobbled out of the tent and went as quickly as I could toward the place I swore I'd never see again. I approached the cave and my heart sank. 2 backpacks sat just inside the entrance. I pulled out my knife and flashlight, then cautiously peeked inside. I felt a change in the breeze and turned to find the ranger staring at me. I looked him up and down. "You," I said. "The last time I saw you was when we found the boy." He said nothing. "It was never a random animal attack," I said. "It was you." He took a step toward me. "Of course it was," he said. "How wonderful was it to watch you years ago as you floundered around looking for some predator that stood beside you. You son of a bitch." I pulled out my knife and held it ready. He paused, then smiled. "Do you really think that knife can hurt me?" I looked at it. "Pretty sure," I said. "It's made of iron." His smile vanished. "So you do know what I am." I pulled out a bottle of brown water. "I made sure to grab some runoff from the rainstorm," I said. "It might not do as good as rust water, but let's find out." I opened the bottle and threw some water at him. He dodged it as though it was acid. At the same time, I swung with the knife. He dodged with ease. "Why don't you turn into the big pussy that you are?" I said, taunting him. "Because we both know when I transform, I'm vulnerable for a moment," he said, "and I'm sure you would love to take advantage of a vulnerable moment." He swung and connected with my stomach, knocking the wind out of me. I recovered and swung the knife in a vicious downswing at him, which he easily dodged. I kept moving forward, stabbing and slashing at him. I couldn't get close enough to connect. He was too fast. "You can't defeat me," he said. "Look at you, like an injured deer just waiting to be devoured." "Be quiet," yelled Lucy, I yelled. At the mention of his name, he froze. I knew I didn't have much time. I took advantage of the moment, lunging at him with my knife. If I had been uninjured, I would have closed the distance between us with 2 quick steps and buried the knife in his heart. Unfortunately, in the heat of the moment, I forgot about my injured ankle. I stepped forward on my good leg, then faltered when I tried to put weight on the injured one. Instead of burying the knife in his heart, it went through his left thigh. He screamed in pain and ran out of the cave. I took out my flashlight and started toward the back of the cave. There I found a mutilated body next to a pile of bones. There was a note in her hand. I sat down, took it, and read, "I can't believe how stupid I was not to see this much sooner. All the time guiding us was just a ploy. He never wanted to help us. He never cared about any of us or our safety. I need to write this quickly before he comes back." The ranger led us here and told us to wait, that we'd be safe in the cave. He left us alone. Dean pulled out his flashlight and explored deeper into the cave. He found a large pile of bones. Off to the side of them was a pile of clothes. We ran toward the opening, but the ranger had returned. "So you didn't listen," he said, leering at us. "I told you to stay here, not explore my home." "What are you?" I said. He smiled for the first time since I'd met him, but his smile wasn't comforting, it was terrifying. I watched in horror as he changed into a giant cat creature. It didn't look quite like a panther or mountain lion. He lunged at us with amazing speed. He grabbed my leg and tore a large gash in it. I fell to the floor screaming. Dean tried to defend me, swinging his knife around and holding it at bay, but it stalked around him and cornered him. He only had one chance. He looked at me with sadness in his eyes and then ran past the creature and out of the cave. It looked at me and my leg, then sprinted out after Dean. I know why he did it. He was trying to give me time to escape, but with my leg, there was no way I could outrun that thing. What he actually did was give me time to say goodbye. If you're reading this, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I led you to your death. If you do somehow survive and make it out of here, please tell our families what really happened here. Goodbye. I fought back tears as I read the final words of this brave girl. I limped to the front of the cave and looked out as the rain stopped. It was like seeing a new world being born. I tried my radio and got an immediate answer. I gave them my GPS coordinates and told them to prepare for casualties. I'm still a park ranger even months later. I made sure that the trail was sealed off. I carry an iron knife and rust water with me at all times. I carry the rust water in a squirt gun just in case. The bones were removed from the cave and subjected to DNA testing. Aside from this group of victims, including Devin, there were several other people who had gone missing in the park over the years. The official version of the events was that a rogue animal had been hunting people. I was told it would be best for my career if I didn't reveal the true nature of the predator. I still search for the creature and post signs everywhere to be on the lookout for an older ranger wearing a uniform with no patches on it. There's a number to call if anyone spots him. It's my personal cell phone number. From time to time I hear reports of a large cat that's limping on its hind leg. I try to make my way to that spot as quickly as possible, but I have yet to catch him. I posted this story in memory of that brave girl, but also as a warning. Never go on an unposted trail. And beware of those you meet in the woods, even if they wear a uniform. I'm posting this as a warning. There are things out there that you don't want to know about. Stay away from them. Don't go looking for them. I'll tell you my story in hopes that it will quench your curiosity. It was a night like any other night. At least lately, I had barely arrived at the ranger's station and there were already 4 calls of vacationers' homes getting broken into. Out here in the West Virginia Wildlife Preserve, people tend to think that just because they plant some houses that the animals should somehow know and respect boundaries. That's kinda tough when the animals are on a huge plot of land where they've never been hunted and never even been threatened by anything other than a bigger animal. Folks seem to think this is a great vacation spot for them. What they don't realize is it's also a great vacation spot for the animals. I hopped in the company truck and started toward my first destination of the night. An elderly couple had been terrorized by a deer that literally broke in through a sliding glass door. They managed to trap it in a side room and needed someone to go release it. I got elected. When I got there, the vacationers looked like the ones caught in headlights. They were still wide-eyed. I could tell they were in shock. I had them go into another room and close the door. Once they were out of the way, I found the closest door to the outside and opened it. Then I went to the room with the deer in it. I slowly opened the door and was shocked to find the room covered in blood. The deer was laying on the floor panting. I approached it slowly, circling around to leave the doorway open, hoping to give it an escape route. The closer I got, the more I realized this deer wasn't going anywhere. Its side was covered with claw marks. At first I thought a coyote had attacked it, but the marks were too far apart. They were large enough to be caused by a bear, but the individual claws were too far apart. I'd never seen anything like this. If I had to compare it to something, I'd say Freddy Krueger sliced it up. The deer's eyes went wide when I approached it, but it didn't jump up and run. I took this as a bad sign. Its breath came in ragged gasps as I struggled to roll it over. Once I did, it was my turn to struggle breathing. Its entire side was torn to shreds, but that wasn't the worst part. There were large chunks that were missing. I examined the wounds and found bite marks where the missing flesh should have been, but the bites were massive. If it wouldn't have challenged the laws of nature as well as my own sanity, I would have said it was bitten by a shark. Blood poured out of the side and the deer struggled to draw breath. I stood and left the room, leaving the poor creature the dignity of a private death. When I went back in, it was still. I took pictures with my cell phone and tried my best to carry the creature out without making more of a mess. After I got it loaded on the back of my truck, I went back inside and talked to the vacationers. When I opened the door to the room they were in, the woman's eyes grew wide and she started screaming. The man's eyes were the size of saucers as well. I approached them slowly with my arms outstretched to try to calm them down. It seemed to have the opposite effect. They started climbing the furniture and clawing at the walls to get away from me. I decided to back away and give them some room. "What's wrong?" I said. The man pointed a shaky finger at me. "Yo, you're covered in blood," he said. "The deer got you," the woman said. "You've got rabies." "Or worse," the man said, keeping his distance. "I'm sorry, folks," I said. "This is the deer's blood." "You killed it just for breaking in," the woman said. "What? No, it was already injured. I just took it to my truck." The couple seemed to settle down and consider this. "So you don't have rabies," the man said slowly, looking me up and down. "Or anything else," the woman said, hiding behind her husband. "No, ma'am, I'm fine." She took her turn eyeing me up and down, I assumed looking for wounds. Being satisfied, they asked the one question I didn't want to answer. "So what killed the deer?" the man said. "I really don't know," I said truthfully. Having just gotten them calmed down, I didn't want to send them back into a panic. "It was probably just a coyote," I said. "A coyote," the man said, diving back into the pool of panic. "Or a bear," I said, trying and failing to calm them. "A bear," the woman said, diving in after her husband. "You know, folks, you've had a traumatic night," I said. "I can't tell you what to do, but if I were you, We're leaving," the woman said, dragging her husband out of the room. "That sounds like a good idea," I said, and then like an idiot I added, "I hope you enjoyed your stay." They either didn't hear me or ignored me. Either way, it wasn't long until I heard a car start, then roar away from the house. I went back into the room where the deer had been trapped and started working backwards from there, trying to find out what had happened. It wasn't hard to pick up the trail. It had been bleeding badly. Seeing the bites and claw marks made that fairly obvious. I tracked back through the kitchen and out the smashed glass door. Once outside, I turned on my flashlight. The trail was a little harder to follow, but not much. I could still see drops of blood beside its tracks as I followed them back toward the pond behind the house. I approached the pond and saw signs of a struggle. This must have been where the deer was attacked. There were other tracks in with the deers, but they didn't make sense to me. They were large, too large. Their shape was odd as well. If I had to call them anything, I would have called them duck prints, but massive, larger than any duck by many times. A giant duck with shark teeth. I think I'll leave that out of my report, I thought. It suddenly struck me what the tracks were. It was a man with swim fins on his feet. But why? Why go to all that trouble to poach a deer when you can just knock it out with a tranquilizer gun? My mind sent me an answer, but I didn't like it. What if the man is a psychopath, just getting his kicks by killing an animal with his bare hands? I thought about the mental hospital in the neighboring county and wondered if one of their patients had taken an unsanctioned leave of absence and they were trying to keep it quiet. I didn't like that thought one bit. Aside from the fact that it didn't explain the huge bites on the deer, it also meant we had someone who might suddenly get a taste for killing. Doing this to animals was horrible, but what if he decided to go after something bigger? I shot a look at the house, wondering how many vacationers were within a short walk from this spot and how many were armed. As I contemplated the safety of the people in the area, I heard something behind me. I whipped around and shone my light but saw nothing. I scanned the pond and saw a ripple emanating from the middle. Probably just a fish jumping. I took some more pictures of the struggle area with my phone, then started back toward my truck. I had more calls to answer and this riddle would have to wait. I drove halfway around the lake, around 3 miles to the other vacation home where a break-in had been reported. When the woman in her 30s answered the door, she took a step back. "Oh my," she said, looking at the dried blood all over my uniform. "Good evening, ma'am. Sorry about my appearance," I said. "Did you report a break-in?" "Yes, we did. Please come in," she said in a friendly tone, yet gave me a wide berth while closing the door. She led me upstairs to the kitchen. For some reason I was expecting to find blood all over like with the last house. However, this was a completely different mess. She showed me the door. It had been forced open but not shattered like the last one. There was only a small amount of glass broken. Then the door latch had been unlocked and the door slid open. There were faint images of my giant duck tracks like the last house. My spine turned to ice. This house was over 3 miles away from the other. There were many more people in that space that might have fallen victim to this crazed person. The woman showed me the rest of the kitchen and the mess that had been left. There were a few cans of sardines that had been opened and eaten, and also some cans of tuna fish. The strange thing was how they were opened. The cans had been torn into with something sharp, but not a can opener. The marks looked like they were torn open with claws. I shuddered to imagine the amount of strength it took to do something like that. And then I spotted it. Beside one of the cans of tuna was a small puddle of blood. "Ma'am, could I trouble you for a sandwich bag?" I said. She handed me one and I carefully tried to scrape as much blood into it as possible. I sealed it and put it in my pocket, then went out through the broken door. Behind the house, just like with most of these vacation houses, there was a pond. I traced the tracks back to it and they disappeared at the water line. I shone my light over the water, but the only thing I saw was a stray turtle. I stared at it for a long time, as though it would somehow give me a clue as to what was going on. "What should we do?" the woman said, nearly scaring me half to death. I hadn't heard her follow me out the door and into the yard. "I'll send someone around to look at that door in the morning," I said. "In the meantime, it might not be a bad idea to sleep in a room that has a lock on the door. I'm sure they won't be back, but just in case." She didn't seem very comforted by that idea, but thanked me as I left. The next 2 reports were just teenagers breaking in and stealing beer. That was it. No bloody wildlife, no weird tracks, just kids being kids. I went back to the station, changed out of my bloody uniform, and spent the rest of the night filling out reports on what had happened. When my shift was over and I passed on what had happened, I took a little trip to the neighboring county. I stopped in at the mental hospital and asked if they had any escapes lately. The nurse looked at me like I had asked her if she was wearing deodorant. "We don't have escapes," she said with obvious pride that showed as arrogance. I thanked her and left, feeling less than satisfied with her answer. Next, I stopped in at the local police department and asked one of my friends on the force if they could analyze the blood sample for me. I shared my thoughts that there might be an escapee from the mental hospital and the blood sample might help us find out who and track him down. It was well past noon until I got to bed. That night when I got to work, it was pandemonium. There had been more break-ins and people were starting to panic. The owner of the resort was frantic. People were canceling left and right and wanting their money back. When I walked in, he stormed a pudgy face right up into mine. "You told people to go home," he fumed, glaring up at me. I merely suggested, "Do you want to pay their rental out of your salary?" "I work for the state, not you," I said. He turned a deeper shade of red. "Would you rather see people in body bags instead of animals?" I said. "That wouldn't do much for business now, would it?" He turned fire engine red and stormed out mumbling, "We'll see." I investigated 5 break-ins that night. Only 2 of them were legit. The rest seemed like half-hearted attempts to stage a break-in so they could get out of paying for their rental. The 2 real ones shared the same characteristics as before, just enough of a broken window to open the door, the cans of whatever seafood was available. They even got shrimp out of the freezer. Everything about the way the intruder acted pointed to a person. All I needed to know was who. Again, I followed the tracks back to the nearby pond. I stood for a long time studying the surface of the water. I knew these ponds were all designed the same, a roughly 40-yard by 40-yard body of water around 5 feet deep in the middle, stocked with mostly bluegill for catch and release fishing. Anyone using these ponds to hide would have to be holding their breath for inhuman periods of time. I stared at the surface for 20 minutes. If someone was out there, they had an invisible snorkel or an extra set of lungs. After my rounds of investigating and reporting, I decided to stick around and do a little extra investigating. I ran home, grabbed my swim trunks, mask, and snorkel, and went to the site of the most recent break-in. I waded out into the water, unsure of what I would find when a snake slithered past me. I let it go and waded deep enough to where I could swim. I hovered at the level of the surface, dipping my mask underwater to get a glimpse of whatever there was to see. There wasn't much: fish, underwater plants, and lots of water, just what you would expect from a pond. As I kept going towards the middle, the water was getting deeper. I now couldn't touch the bottom. I had to float on the surface. Looming in front of me was a dark spot on the bottom of the pond. I took it for a rock but swam close enough to investigate anyway. In for a penny, in for a pound. As I drew close enough to hover over it, I realized it wasn't a rock. I took a deep breath and dove to find out what it was. The further I swam down, the further I was able to swim down. I kept going and going. Light disappeared. I was sure I had been swimming straight down for a solid minute without touching the bottom. I turned and looked up. The surface of the pond was only a pinprick of light. My lungs screamed at me to turn around. I had no choice but to comply. I clawed at the water in desperation. It seemed like I was swimming in mud or something was pulling me down, almost like a force or current pushing against me, wanting me to drown before I could fully explore this hidden secret. After what felt like an eternity, I broke the surface of the water and gasped for air. I swam over to the shallows and walked out of the pond. I collapsed on the shore and lay there for a long time trying to regain my breath. As my brain received oxygen, I thought about what had happened and if it had been real, an illusion, or if I had just gotten turned around somehow and stuck at the bottom. I had to find out. I wasted no time driving 2 counties over and renting some dive equipment, along with a light. So armed, I returned to the pond and walked toward the middle again. This time when I dove toward the dark spot, I was able to see exactly what it was. I used the flashlight to examine the darkness. As I swam deeper, the sides closed in on me as if I was swimming down the gullet of some massive fish. I've never been claustrophobic before, but that was rapidly changing. I barely had any room to maneuver as the sides closed in. I contemplated turning around, but there was no room. I could feel myself start to panic. I had to focus to keep my breaths regular. I was very close to a panic attack when suddenly the tunnel opened up again. The sides grew further apart. I checked my watch and I had been under for 15 minutes. The sides of the tunnel had spread out so far they were barely visible, and I could see a light ahead of me. I swam toward it, desperate to get out of this water. I broke through the surface and looked around. I was in the pond. Somehow I had gotten turned around and was back in the pond. I swam to the side until I could stand and walked out to the shore. Looking around, I made a startling discovery. I was in a pond, the same one as the break-in last night. Somehow, there was a hidden tunnel between the 2 ponds. That's how the robber never gets caught. He just swims to the next pond slick as snot. No fuss, no muss. I now knew the how, but I needed to know more. As tempting as it was to swim back through the tunnel, I was still a little shaken and didn't want to risk an underwater panic attack. I walked back to my truck, took off my dive equipment, and drove back to the dive shop. I asked about frequent customers, especially for refilling tanks. They told me they had a few regulars that came in every weekend, but no one knew, and no one who needed refilled more than once a week. I asked if there were any other dive shops in the area, and they told me the next closest one was over 100 miles away. I went home frustrated. It wasn't making sense. He would need air to swim back and forth through that tunnel, and that was his escape route. I was sure of it. I tried to sleep through the afternoon, but my mind wouldn't let me rest. It was working on the impossible puzzle of how the robber was getting air. I borrowed a couple trail cams and set one up at each pond. I needed to see if he had some new tank system or what. I also wanted to identify him and shut him down fast. I made sure to stay away from those ponds that night so he would feel free to do his thing. In the morning, I gathered the cameras and took them home. I downloaded both memory cards before watching the video. Just as the second download was finished, my phone rang. "Hello," I said. "Hey, John, it's Steve. I got the results from that blood you gave me the other day." "Great," I said, hitting the play button on my computer. "Were you able to get a match on any hospital records?" "Not exactly." "Why not?" I asked as a ghostly green image appeared on my computer. The image was blurred, but it was definitely the size of a man walking upright toward the camera. I clicked to the next slide and froze at what I saw. "Well, the thing is, the blood you gave me came back as reptile DNA." I registered the words he said in my mind, just like I registered the image on my computer screen, but I just couldn't place them in reality. "Are you there?" he said into the phone. "Yes, I'm sorry," I said. "Could you send a copy of your findings to my office?" "Sure, no problem." "Thanks, I appreciate it. You really helped me figure this out." "Anytime," he said cheerfully before hanging up. I hadn't taken my eyes off the computer screen the whole time. No matter how long I stared at it, I couldn't make my mind acknowledge it as real. Standing there, large as life, was not a man in a wetsuit. It was a creature. I could see the wide mouth full of sharp teeth that looked exactly like the bites on the deer. I could see the webbed feet that looked like swim fins, only they had claws sticking out of the front where toes would be. I saw the razor-sharp claws on its webbed hands. It was a full-on nightmare staring me in the face. I sat back and thought for a long time. Then I printed copies of the images and put them in an envelope. I rushed to the station to share the information I had with my fellow rangers. As I was showing them, their faces ranged in emotions from shock to disbelief to outright mocking. As I was going through my investigation, the owner of the timeshares walked in. "What are we all looking at?" he said, eyeing me with contempt. "It seems like John has solved the case of the break-ins," one of the other rangers said. The owner approached. He picked up the lab report and read it, then stared for a long time at the picture. "Do you know what this is?" he said absently. "I really don't know yet," I said. "I've never seen anything like it." He turned to me and smiled. "This is money," he said, holding up the picture. "What do you mean?" I said. "Those idiots that go around hunting, what do they call them?" "Cryptids." "Yeah, cryptids. They'll pay through the nose if they think they can find something like this. And then there's the TV shows and merchandising," he said. "You may have saved my financial hide." He beamed at me. "I don't think you understand," I said. "This is a dangerous animal. If you had seen what it did to that deer." "So what do you want to do? Hunt it down and kill it?" "Maybe not kill it, but definitely tranquilize it and take it to a secure location where it can't hurt anyone." "You dumb son of a bitch," he yelled. "I could make a mint. I wouldn't even have to repair those houses. They would all rush in to investigate and leave piles of cash in my bank account." "But what about the people?" "Who cares about the people?" he said. "Throw them all out. I've got the chance of a lifetime beating down my front door and you want to flush it down the toilet because you're scared someone might break a nail." He was breathing hard and staring up into my face. The air was charged with fury, his and mine, and then a sudden calm came over him. "Charles," he said, addressing the lead ranger, "isn't this a wildlife preserve?" "Yes, it is," Charles said warily. "And aren't the wildlife on this preserve protected from all tampering by law?" "Well, I guess so," Charles said. "What if those animals present a threat?" I said to Charles. "How many deer were killed by coyotes on this preserve last year?" the owner said. "Dozens," Charles said. Were the coyotes removed from the preserve? No, Charles said. The owner turned and shot me a triumphant look. John, Charles said, I know you have everyone's best interests in mind, but you're gonna have to let this go. I glared at him. And what happens when this thing decides it likes to eat humans? All the eyes in the room that had been on me suddenly found somewhere else to look, all but the owner. He was smiling from ear to ear. I think the pudgy little bastard was about to break into the happy dance. I searched the room for any support but found none. I pulled my badge off my shirt, quietly laid it on the desk, and left. If that was the end of my story, I would say I had failed. I took my pension and rented one of the houses on the preserve. The owner had leaked through social media that a cryptid had been spotted on the preserve. As he had guessed, the cryptid hunters and TV crews came in droves, renting everything in sight. My goal was different. I already knew it existed. I knew how it got around without being detected. I stayed at one of the break-in houses. Every night I took a huge tuna I had bought fresh that morning and laid it out beside the pond. I sat in the dark living room and watched the first night as it approached the fish with more caution than curiosity. After sniffing it for a long time, it grabbed it and dove for the pond. Each night after, I laid out a fish and the creature became less cautious. It was being fed and the media frenzy was starving. The hunters had found nothing. There were no sightings as long as I fed it. Everyone had their cameras set up. The few that roamed around left me alone when they saw someone in the house. I guess they thought I was another cryptid hunter and respected my privacy. As the number of sightings stayed at 0, they started turning on the owner, calling him a fraud. His reputation plummeted. After a week with no sightings, people started leaving. In desperation, he did the wrong thing. He hired an actor to dress in a creature suit and roam around. Of course, the hunters and shows saw right through this and destroyed what was left of his reputation. I had rented the house for 2 weeks. Between the rent and the fish, my money was running out. I had kept the people safe, but what would happen when I stopped feeding it? I had managed to clear out most of the people so they would be safe, but what about my fellow rangers? What would happen when it became desperate? When the starving creature no longer had houses full of food to break into, I had 3 more nights until I had to leave. I was out of money. The preserve had become a ghost town. As far as I knew, I was the only renter left. It was decision time. I sat staring at the large tuna on the table with a bottle of bleach next to it. Let it live and see what happens, or kill it. I thought about this for a long time. Both options had merits and consequences. I chose a third option, a much more dangerous one. I took the fish out and laid it where I usually did, then backed up a few feet and stood there. Over an hour passed before the water stirred. I saw the head and eyes of the creature appear as it headed toward the fish, and then it stopped. It had seen me. I made sure to keep still with my arms at my side. It slowly approached and stood. It was a few feet away with the fish in between us. It studied me and sniffed the air, then became agitated. Perhaps it had smelled my scent before as a pursuer. It let out a soft hiss but bent down and took the fish, keeping its eyes on me the entire time. Then once it had its meal, it did the most incredible physical display I've ever seen. It leaped 20 feet in the air and landed in a perfect dive right in the middle of the pond, leaving almost no splash. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding and collapsed to the ground shaking. Once I had recovered, I went back inside and fell into a fitful sleep. That was only part of my plan. The next night would decide who lived and who died. I did exactly like the night before, minus the fish. The creature approached, stepped up to me and looked around for the fish. I showed it my empty hands. It sniffed at them and growled, having smelled the scent of fish. It looked at my hands and I wondered if it was going to bite them off as a substitute. It hissed at me and sniffed my face. I saw it flexing its claws the whole time. I stared into its face, those massive razor-sharp teeth, and swallowed hard. I did all I could to stay still, to show it I wasn't a threat. My heart hammered in my chest. It opened its jaws and showed me those horrible teeth. Its breath was a horrid stench I had never smelled and hoped to never again. I closed my eyes, not knowing if they would ever open. Seconds fell into minutes. I opened my eyes and I was alone. There wasn't even a ripple in the water. I sighed. My decision had been made. It had shown restraint and I would too. I went back inside, packed and left. I could only hope and pray that the people that remained, including my former co-workers, would be safe. I went home and slept restlessly. In the morning there was a report in the newspaper on a break-in at the wildlife preserve. They said the only thing that was taken were cans of tuna fish. I smiled ruefully and wondered how long it would stay that way. If you're reading this, don't go looking for this thing. If you see it, don't tell others about it. Just leave it alone and hope for the best. I used to love my job. I was a watchman at a wind farm. All I had to do was make rounds a few times a night to make sure no one was messing with the wind turbines. I would read a lot of books, and eventually, if I got bored, I'd bring my portable DVD player and watch movies all night. The only thing that broke up the time was the patrols. I'd arrive every night around 9 p.m. and get relieved by the day shift at 9 a.m. There wasn't much to it. I'd pull up beside the watchman I was relieving, we'd exchange pleasantries, he'd tell me if anything went on during the day, and then he'd be on his way. I don't remember him ever telling me anything more than seeing some deer or maybe a bear. There were a dozen windmills stretched out over 5 miles, each connected by a dirt road. When I first started working for this company, I would get out and check the locks on the access door to each windmill. After 5 years, I'd drive by and barely glance at the things. Most times I'd still be watching my movie or show while I'm driving. Not a lot of traffic on that dirt road. I drove into a ditch only once, but I got the car out with minimal difficulty. The worst part about that was the embarrassment. One evening I was in a hurry and running late. I jumped in the car and flew to the worksite with something nagging in the back of my mind. I made it just in time, got my report, and settled into my routine. I did my first round with no problem. Twilight had just faded, leaving the world diving into nighttime darkness. Clouds had been forming all evening, and I saw a flock of turkeys cross my path near one of the fields. That meant it was going to storm. My first round through was a breeze. Nothing was happening. I didn't even see animals that I'd usually see, except for the turkeys. Maybe since it was going to storm, the other animals were battening down the hatches and settling in wherever they were. The drive around the 5-mile dirt road circle took around 30 minutes. They don't like us going very fast, and technically we're supposed to check the door on each wind turbine. I and the other drivers have it timed so that it looks like we checked. I got back to the main building a little after 9:30. I pulled out my portable DVD player and started watching Die Hard. Of course, I fell asleep. I woke to credits rolling. Shit, I said, remembering my missed round. I threw the car in gear and flew off towards the wind turbines. It was right then that I remembered what I had forgotten. A flashing light announced, "Low fuel." I cursed myself for forgetting to fill up yesterday on the way home. This is my second round, I thought. I should have enough to make it through the rest of the night and get to a gas station. This was the thought I clung to the rest of the night. My second round was uneventful. My eyes were constantly drawn to the fuel gauge, but there was nothing I could do about it. Once you're in for the night, you had to stay. If they caught you driving off the job, you're fired. I didn't want to lose such a gravy job, so I stayed put, although there were a couple of times I considered a quick 2-mile trip to the gas station. The problem was my boss. He was a bit of a prick and liked to pull surprise inspections at all hours of the night. He liked to pretend he was being a nice guy and showing up to see if I needed anything, but I knew why he was really there. If he showed up tonight, I would ask for a couple of gallons of gas. Maybe that would solve my problem and keep him from inspecting as often. Partway through my second movie, Die Hard 2 of course, I went for my next round. It had just started to rain, making my windows fog up and my defroster wasn't working the best. By the time I went for my fourth round, the weather had made a decision to switch from mildly annoying rain to grab the animals and head for the Ark. It was raining so hard I could barely see in front of me. I drove at crawling speed. The rain had worn ruts in the road. In some of the lower depressions, there were puddles across the entire road. I was glad I was driving a Jeep. I got right in the middle of one of the giant puddles when my engine gave out. I cranked and cranked, but it was no use. I was out of gas. I was never gonna live this down. I could hear it now. 5 years from now, the other guy would be telling the story about the moron who ran out of gas in the middle of a rainstorm. So now I had a decision to make. Do I stay in the car and ride out the storm, or do I walk back to the main building and wait for the day shift to arrive? I checked my watch. Nearly 8 hours until my relief arrived. The way it was raining, there was no way I was walking back. If there had been an emergency gas can full of fuel, I might have considered it, but the can hadn't had any gas in it for a long time. Yet another wonderful present from my idiot boss. He said it was a waste of gas to have it sit around and grow old. I guess the concept of emergency never crossed his mind. I didn't want to drain my battery, so I didn't watch any more movies. I sat and listened to the rain pound the roof of my car like someone was dropping marbles from the sky. That's when my mind started playing tricks on me. I guess it was as bored as I was, and decided to have a little fun. I was whistling a little tune in my own off-key way that makes people stuff cotton in their ears when I happened to glance in the rear view mirror, and the mirror glanced back. I swore I saw a set of eyes looking in the back window. I whipped around so fast my neck cracked, but nothing was there. I hit the door lock button just to be sure, as if that would help in the middle of nowhere in a downpour. My whistling grew louder and more off-key as I did all I could to avoid looking in the mirror. Eventually, it was too much. My eyes were drawn to the mirror like a magnet. I looked. There was nothing there. I chuckled nervously at myself for being so stupid and leaned my head back against the headrest. I don't remember falling asleep, but I do remember waking up to nothing. No sound of pounding rain, no sound of animals, no crickets even. It was unnerving. I lowered the window a few inches and listened. There was still no sound. Not even the whooshing of the wind turbine's blades as they spun. I looked at the closest one and the blades were still. It was unusual for the wind to be so calm that it couldn't muster enough energy to turn the blades. I checked my watch and found I had been asleep for 4 hours. The storm clouds had drifted off and the moon had appeared. It wasn't quite full, but bright enough to light the ground and create hundreds of shadows of the trees that surrounded me. It was a beautiful night. The kind of night that made me glad to live in rural Pennsylvania. It made me seriously rethink waiting in the Jeep until morning. My mind held a tug of war as I hummed, should I stay or should I go? I looked at my watch again. In just under 4 hours, my relief would be driving through the gate. What would he do if I wasn't there? It would be much easier to explain and have him go get me some gas rather than wait for him to do his first round and find me sitting in the middle of the road. My mind was made up. I grabbed the flashlight from the glove compartment, staring for a long moment at the handgun sitting beside it. I thought about it but decided to leave it behind. Most of the animals in these woods want nothing to do with humans, and the others are easily scared away with a little yelling. I locked the door as I stepped out and my foot landed in a deep puddle. I sighed as the water oozed past my ankle and filled my sneaker. The puddle encompassed the entire car. It was easily 12 feet across. I knew hopping on one foot wouldn't do anything but get my clothes wet, so I put my second foot down and closed the door. I started wading through the puddle to the far side until I found dry land. I shone my light at the closest wind turbine. It was number 5. I knew that was the furthest one from the gate. Being at the halfway point, it didn't matter if I went forward or back. I decided to go forward and started off on my trek. For the first part of my trip, the only sound I heard was my shoes squishing. It was unnerving having your only companions being total silence and hundreds of shadows cast from the trees. I shone the flashlight around in the trees and saw plenty of eyes shining back at me, but they were silent. It was as if they were seated in the pews of a church and I was walking up the aisle looking for my seat. The eyes ranged in size from small to quite large, and yet none of them made a sound. Were they really afraid of me? I paused to take a break, and that's when I heard it. A footstep behind me. It wasn't a heavy thud, it was a soft squish of grass under a large foot. I whipped around and shone my light where I thought I heard the sound come from, but there was nothing. I panned all around with the light, but all saw were a gravel road and endless trees. Seeing nothing was possibly worse than seeing something. A deer, a bear, even a coyote would have been something I could deal with, scare away, fight off. But nothing created this void that my mind filled with all kinds of horrible creatures. The unnerving silence continued as I started walking faster without thinking about it. Even the squish of my shoes seemed louder in the absence of woodland noises. I started thinking about my destination. It was tempting to cut through the woods and save myself a lot of time, seeing I was still on a long loop of road. Had it been daylight, I might have considered it. In the dead of night, with a nearly full moon over my shoulder and dawn hours away, I didn't give it a second thought. I thought that perhaps whistling would soothe my jangled nerves. I tried whistling the happiest tune I could think of, but the echo came back to me bent and twisted like the children's song that plays in a horror movie. I ended my whistling soon after it started. I was halfway through a verse when the tune died on my lips. The sudden, unexpected silence brought me the horrible gift of another footfall behind me. I whipped around as quickly as I could and shone my flashlight around. This time my mind wasn't given the luxury of scaring me with nothing. This time I saw a set of eyes. They were large and red, but what was most unnerving about them was their distance from the ground. Whatever it was, its eyes were a good 8 feet off the ground. It was 40 or 50 yards away and hiding behind a tree, but those eyes will haunt me for the rest of my life. Unfortunately, I didn't know how long that would be, especially with such a monstrously large creature obviously stalking me. I'd love to say that I carefully weighed my options and came to a sensible solution to what this creature was and how to deal with it. I didn't. I ran like the devil himself was chasing me. It surprised me that I kept hold of my flashlight. I found speed I never knew I had. Desperation will do that. My mind raced faster than my feet, but there was no solution it could come up with. I could hear the footfalls behind me coming closer. It was going to catch me. It was only a matter of when. As my mind grasped at any and every straw, my salvation rose in front of me like a lighthouse to a lost fisherman. One of the wind turbines loomed in front of me. I knew the code to get inside in case I ever had an emergency and would need to shut one down. I didn't think I could run any faster, but hearing the footsteps behind me and seeing my salvation in front of me, I felt like Roadrunner when he put on a burst of speed and disappeared in a cloud of smoke. Of course, that was all in my mind. Reality dashed my illusion as the sounds of massive feet grew even closer. It no longer cared about stealth. I could hear it on the gravel road now. My curiosity wanted to turn and at least identify my pursuer, but I forced myself to focus on what was in front of me, stumbling because I wasn't focused, or because of seeing the creature that would be my doom would be catastrophic. The 400-foot-tall monolith loomed large in front of me. I envisioned where the keypad was, knowing I had one shot to type in the code before my untimely death. As salvation drew near, panic set in. I became obsessed with the notion that I would be caught at any moment. I have no idea what possessed me to do it other than sheer terror and desperation. I took the only thing I had available to me, my flashlight, and threw it backward. By some miracle, I heard a muffled thud and a slight groan. The sounds came from much closer than I wanted, but I still refused to look back. I reached the door to the turbine, punched in the code, and yanked the door open, straining my arms because of its weight. I was no sooner inside than I pulled the door shut. Just before it latched, a set of massive fingers appeared in the doorway. I pulled with everything I had, feeling muscles strained to the point of breaking. The door somehow continued its momentum toward closing. The giant fingers were slammed between the door and the frame. They disappeared, and I heard an inhuman howling from the other side as I shut and locked the door. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for air as my mind kept replaying the image of the fingers appearing in the doorway. Like a frozen playback, I saw with startling clarity the fingers were the size of bratwursts, covered in brown hair with claws sticking out of them. I lay on the floor panting, searching for any options but finding none. For the moment I felt safe, but how long would that last? How would anyone find me in here? Would they even look, or would they think I was lost in the woods? And the biggest question, what the hell was that thing? I didn't want to speculate because the possible answers were too terrible to comprehend, especially with whatever it was still outside somewhere close. Just as I began to feel my adrenaline abate, there was a pounding at the door. It reverberated through the giant hollow tube that was now my salvation and my prison. I jumped up, not knowing what to do. My only escape route led into the claws of a monster. I looked all around for any help, but finding none, I resigned myself to wait for my inevitable demise. I could see the door vibrate with every impact. I knew it was made of sturdy metal, but even metal has its breaking point. As I searched the small room that was a mere 10 feet across, my eyes were drawn upward. There, attached to the side, was a ladder. It stretched upward into infinity. There seemed to be no end. Thankfully, there were lights along the side every few feet, but that was little comfort. I wondered about my choices. Wait here for the door to collapse or climb an impossible climb straight up with no rest points, no timeouts, no do-overs. If I climbed, it would be all or nothing. Bailing halfway up just meant I would need to climb the whole way back down to my current hopeless situation. I had no idea if I had the strength or stamina for such a climb, but another round of pounding at the door made my mind up for me. I stepped onto the ladder tentatively as if waiting for the rung to give out under my foot. After a moment, I stepped onto the second one, then the third. The fourth rung brought near disaster. I slipped and fell back to the floor, landing in a puddle. This painfully reminded me that my shoes were soaking wet. Even though there were grip pads on the rungs, I still needed to be extra careful and step on the arch of my foot, not the ball. I got up and checked for injuries. I was sure there would be a bruise or two if I survived, but other than that, the only thing that was hurt was my pride. The thumping on the door refocused my priorities. I stood and started up the ladder, stepping with the arch of my foot this time. I started out slowly, making sure every foothold was secure before stepping to the next rung. Soon I gained confidence and was moving a little faster. My breathing was getting ragged as the exertion sapped my energy. I regretted skipping supper and hadn't eaten any of my snacks this evening. I paused my climb and hooked my arm into the ladder to keep me from falling as I caught my breath. It was then I made two mistakes. One was looking up, the other was looking down. When I looked up, it seemed like I was no closer to the top than when I started. When I looked down, I saw I had made enough progress to kill me if I stumbled. There was one other thing I saw when I looked down that made me want to cry. Hanging on the wall were several safety harnesses. There was a metal cable that ran beside the ladder. For one brief moment, I considered climbing back down to get a harness, but I realized I might not have the energy to get back up. The rest of the climb seemed to take forever. My breaks became more frequent and took longer each time. My feet were screaming at me for a rest. I was near total exhaustion when I looked up and saw the top of the ladder. The excitement carried me the rest of the way up. I climbed off the top of the ladder and collapsed onto the metal landing. I laid there for what seemed like an eternity until my strength returned. I stepped through the door that led into the generator room. It was cramped due to the machinery taking up most of the room. There was a small walkway beside the generator and a hatch that opened to go outside. I looked around and found a safety rig. I put it on and secured the line to a hook as I opened the hatch to the outside. Dawn had broken and the world was lit with the brilliant orange of early morning. The beauty so overtook me that I didn't notice the wind that had been still after the storm now buffeted against me, threatening to knock me off my feet. I stumbled, feeling grateful for the safety line. I watched as one of the massive blades passed by a few feet away. My only reason to take this risk was to look down and see if my pursuer had given up and left. I slowly peeked over the side, fighting the nausea-inducing vertigo from the sheer height. I looked around at the tiny trees below and didn't see anything out of the ordinary. I was about to go back inside when movement caught my eye. It was the creature. It had come around from the other side of the base of the turbine. I marveled at how tiny it looked from up here, yet it still presented me with the conundrum of how to escape. I stepped back inside and looked around for the answer. After a brief search, I found a radio amongst the controls on the wall. I pressed a button and an alarm went off. I pressed it again to silence it. I tried another button and was rewarded with static. "Hello, hello, can anybody hear me?" I said into the microphone. I repeated it again, still receiving static. On the third try, my boss answered. "What the hell are you doing in one of the units?" he said. It was an emergency and this was the only way I could contact someone. He harumphed on the other end. "What was the emergency?" "I'd rather not say on the radio," I said. "Can you come to get me?" He sighed. "Which unit are you in?" "Number 6. "It'll be a little while." "Like how long?" "Like when I get there," he grumbled. The line went back to static. I felt some relief in the fact that at least someone knew where I was and was coming to get me, eventually. Out of curiosity, I climbed back outside and leaned over to check on the creature. My blood turned to ice in my veins from what I saw. The creature was looking up at me. It must have heard the alarm. Then it did the thing that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. It started climbing the outside of the wind turbine. My eyes were drawn to the horrible sight and were unable to look away. I kept hoping it would lose its grip and fall, but it didn't. It got closer and closer. When it was around halfway up, my mind woke to the danger and sent my body into action. I lunged back inside and closed the hatch. I unfastened the safety line and headed back for the main ladder. It took much less time going down the ladder than it did to go up. Several times in my haste, I slipped, nearly taking the express lane down that ended in death. Eventually, I made it. As I took a moment to catch my breath, I heard the top of the turbine being assaulted. The bangs resonated down the tube, making them sound even louder. I opened the door as quietly as possible, hoping the noise the creature was making above would cover my exit. As I did, a few brown hairs fell to the floor. I picked them up and stuck them in my pocket. As I slowly opened the door, it made a slight creak. Suddenly, the noise above me stopped. My heart leaped into my throat. I stopped breathing. My mind sent me unhelpful images of the creature jumping down and dismembering me. As I stood as still as a statue, I smelled smoke. I looked up and black plumes were flowing from the turbine. I ran as fast as I could, back toward my Jeep. I refused to look as I heard a roar behind me. I nearly ran into my boss's car as he turned the corner. "What the hell?" he said, getting out. Look, I said, pointing at the turbine. "I see," he said. "What the hell did you do?" "No, look," I said, pointing toward the black smoke. What am I supposed to be seeing other than millions of dollars literally going up in smoke? I stopped and looked at the burning machine, but there was no creature there. I jumped in the car and slammed my door. "Can we go, please?" I said, trying to hide my terror. He stared at me, then got in the car and drove back to the main building. The whole time I kept shooting furtive glances behind us. He parked in front of the building and looked over at me. "You're gonna have to answer some questions." "I know. Would someone please go get my car? I ran out of gas, that's why I was in the turbine." "Why didn't you just wait in your car?" I opened my mouth to answer, then realized what I was about to say and stopped, leaving it unsaid. "Okay," he said, getting out. "I'll send someone for your car." I followed him inside and lay on the couch in the break room. A short while later, a coworker woke me. "Here are the keys to your car. It's parked out front," he said, "and the boss wants to see you." I took the keys and stood. I looked right toward the boss's office, then looked left toward the exit. It only took a moment of decision to turn left and walk out the door. I never returned, but the memory of that night has never left me, and it never will. The following day, I read in the paper about the turbine fire and how they found a carcass of a bear that must have gotten trapped in the blaze. But I knew better. I knew the company would come after me for the destruction of their expensive turbine. I also knew if I told the truth, they'd haul me away in a rubber truck. Either way, I was about to disappear, and my story would never be told. I found a group that specialized in unexplained phenomena. I walked into their office with a bag in my pocket that had 3 brown hairs in it. I knew they want to hear my story. The screams echoed through the trees. I couldn't tell if they were human or animal. All I knew was they were loud, which meant they were close. As I listened to the high-pitched shrieks, it almost sounded like a couple of people having a shouting match. If I had been at my apartment in town, that's exactly what I would have thought the sound was. But then the pitch changed, and it took on a feral quality. I knew whoever or whatever was making the sound. I wanted nothing to do with them. Thinking you're alone in the wilderness is one thing. It gives a certain freeing feeling like you're so close to nature, but knowing you're alone and hearing the terrifying, nearly indescribable sound sent chills down my spine. I quickly questioned how much longer I would be alone or alive. Did those things know I was here? Were they planning their attack, or was it just a gathering of something like a harmless chill session in the woods in the dead of night? Survival instinct was screaming for me to get out of there as quickly as possible. To hell with the tent and my supplies, just leave. For a brief moment I nearly listened. Later I would wish I had. Fortunately, I hadn't made a fire yet, and decided against one now. If by some miracle those things didn't know I was here, a fire would draw them in like flies, to, well, something I didn't want to be in. Even though the screaming was still going at a fever pitch, I quietly snuck into my tent and zipped it shut, as if some flimsy material would magically keep at bay whatever beasts were raging out there. Searching through my pack, I found my Swiss Army knife and kept it firm in my grasp as I lay down on my sleeping bag. I didn't dare settle in for the night. Sleeping through being attacked by wild whatevers and torn to shreds can be bad for my health. As I lay there, eyes wide, listening to the horrible shrieks that seemed to come from everywhere, they suddenly stopped. At first, this was a relief, but when the sound stopped, so did all other noises of the forest. It was as if someone had hit the mute button on all of nature. I heard a loud thumping sound that sounded like drums beating faster and faster until I realized it was my heart. Trying to calm myself so I didn't have a heart attack on the spot was a challenge. I tried to think of calm blue oceans and sunrises, of beautiful things that had nothing to do with the situation I was in. Apparently, I did my job too well. I don't remember falling asleep, but I remember waking up in a panic. Jumping up, I looked all around for the beasts that were coming to get me, when all that stared back at me were the contents of my backpack and the four walls of the tent. I allowed myself to take a few deep breaths. It was morning, the sun was up and the birds were singing. I took both of those as good signs. Being alive was a bonus as well. It was decision time. Do I pack up and cut my trip short by 2 days? Or do I write off last night's incident as a rare occurrence and not worry about it today in the daylight, as the sun's rays bathed me in warmth? It's funny how fear manifests itself so much stronger at night. Last night the forest seemed like the most horrifying place I'd ever been. Today it looks like all the beauty of nature is spread out before me. I couldn't imagine anything bad happening in such a picturesque place. As I looked out over the clearing in the woods, I saw a large dark spot that was moving towards me. I dove into my tent and emerged with a pair of binoculars. Peering through them, I saw the spot was a bear, and it was headed my way. So much for nothing bad happening in nature. My plan of action was to hide and hope it went away or turn down another path before it got here. That plan didn't work out so well. Within 15 minutes, I could hear it snuffling around the campsite looking for something to eat. I hoped it wouldn't be eating fresh camper. The can of bear spray was firmly in my hand with my white knuckles clenching it. Having it was one thing, using it was another. That was my last resort. Spray and run. The sniffing got louder and I could see the bottom edges of tent being pushed in by a large nose. My knuckles grew a little whiter as I followed its progress along the edge and around the tent. And then there was a pause, a dreadful pause, the kind of pause that horrible decisions are born from. I was contemplating my own horrible decision when the sniffing started again, this time leading away from the tent. Breathing a cautiously optimistic sigh of relief, I opened the tent flap just enough to see the bear lumbering off into the woods. Again, I held a silent vote, just like the song said. Should I stay or should I go? I'd only been camping up here once before, but I didn't remember it being this dangerous. Maybe I just got lucky last time. Not wanting my luck to run out, I packed up my tent and got ready to leave. The sun was already high in the sky, leaving me just a few hours to hike out what took me a full day to hike in. I looked for bear tracks to see which way it had left, but the ground was dry, so there was nothing to see. Crossing my fingers, I headed out on the trail, hoping it had gone some other way. It was easy going, making the terror of last night fade even more. I still kept a wary eye for the bear though. No use in getting so caught up in nature that I ignore her dangers. After around an hour of walking, I found a large rock on the side of the trail and decided to take a break. Pulling out a granola bar and a bottle of water, I looked around as I snacked. There was a clearing in the woods and a rough path leading to it. It wasn't any official path, just one that happens when a lot of feet go the same way and tramp down the foliage. There was a faint whiff of smoke coming from the clearing, but I couldn't see exactly what was causing it. My curiosity wanted to see what was there, but my common sense said no way. In the end, curiosity fought dirty and said the smoke meant there had been a fire and the ashes could blow into the trees if the wind picked up and cause a wildfire. It was a good point, even though the wind was uncannily still at the moment. I took a quick look around to make sure the bear wasn't sneaking up on me, then started down the narrow path. The trees blocked out some of the light as I headed down the path toward the clearing, making me literally descend into darkness. It wasn't a good feeling. My eyes darted around, looking for anything out of the ordinary, and I slowed my pace. Then suddenly, the trees opened up and daylight shone brightly on the clearing, and the remnants of a fire with a wisp of smoke still rising. Whoever had made it had been dangerously uncaring about the safety of the woods. The fire sat right in the middle of a patch of grass, with no ring of stones surrounding it. My ire rose at the carelessness of this person. I found myself wishing very bad things on them when I noticed something else. There were splotches of red all around the fire. It was like someone had spilled red paint all around. It was strange. Why would someone bring paint out here to the middle of the woods? I stalked around the other side of the fire looking for the answer to this mystery. Unfortunately, I found it. There was something pale sitting just outside the burnt grass of the fire. It was next to a splotch of red. I bent down and moved the grass to see more clearly. Picking it up, I saw it was a severed human toe. I dropped it and stood up like a shot. The red splotches made sense to me now. They weren't paint, they were blood. A chill ran down my spine. I suddenly felt very alone and surrounded. My eyes darted all around the clearing and into the trees as I did a slow circle, searching for whatever was about to attack. As I searched, I saw the red splotches led off into the woods in the opposite direction of the trail. Curiosity tried to get me to follow, but I told it to shut the hell up and hightailed it out of there, my head on a swivel searching for threats. Just as I was about to reach the main trail, I literally ran into the bear. I'd been so busy watching behind me for whatever might be chasing me that I didn't see what was in front of me. It turned to face me, showing its red teeth. Then it stood on its hind legs, dwarfing me, and roared. I wished I'd worn the brown pants because I soiled myself in fear. I was so terrified I didn't move. I couldn't. I was paralyzed. It dropped back down onto its front legs and approached me, teeth bared. I knew right then it was responsible for the screams and the dismembered toe. The only thing I couldn't figure out was the fire. I'd never heard of bears being able to start a fire. This was unfortunately the last thought going through my head before being eaten. It sniffed and took a step back. If I'd known dropping a load in my pants would save me, I would have done it last night. As I looked into the eyes of my death, it wasn't looking back at me, it was looking past me. I wasn't sure what kind of trick this bear was pulling. It wasn't like it had to fool me or anything. It had me dead to rights. Curiosity made me turn and follow the bear's gaze. I instantly regretted it. Standing near the clearing was a monster. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before. It stood on hind legs, at least 8 feet tall. It had the horns of a deer, but the face looked like a deer's skull with no skin on it. Its shoulders were covered in what looked like a cloak made of another animal's skin. The bear let out a deep growl full of menace. I took the opportunity to back away and allow the bear a clear path to its adversary. It glanced at me for a moment, then started toward the monster. As soon as it was past me, I dropped my pack and ran down the trail with every ounce of speed I could muster. It didn't matter that my car was miles away. It didn't matter there was no way I could sprint all the way there without collapsing and having a heart attack. Just then I heard the fight. The growling, roaring, slashing, knocking trees down, fight that would have been awesome to watch, from inside a bunker with 2-foot-thick concrete walls. Just me, alone, without a rocket launcher to defend myself. There was no way I was sticking around. I ran for a solid 10 minutes before the stitch in my side told me I had to at least slow to a walk. I didn't dare stop. I knew I had to keep moving. It was my only chance of surviving by some miracle. The sounds of the fight echoed throughout the trees, making it seem surreal to hear it, then hear it echo back again. It sounded like the fight was slowing down. I hoped it would last for a while longer. Maybe whichever one would forget about me or be too tired to track me down. My walk had become a limp. I was nearly out of energy and had a mile to go to the relative safety of my car. Surely by now I could take it easy. As the thought rolled through my brain, the sounds of the fight ceased. The fading echo was all that remained. I wondered which one had been victorious and comforted myself that the victor was surely enjoying the spoils by feasting on the fallen adversary. But in the back of my mind, unease grew. What if it didn't forget me? What if it was following me right now? I found myself walking a little faster, much to the pain and chagrin of my legs. The silence that fell in the aftermath of the fight was disconcerting. The animals around me that had been chattering away, suddenly falling silent, was alarming. I started jogging, each step a new exercise in pain. There was no doubt I was being followed. The footsteps behind me were getting louder by the moment. My car was in sight. I was almost free. The footsteps behind me were very loud now. I knew it was right behind me, but I didn't dare look back. Run, don't think, just run. My thoughts screamed at me. Even my curiosity had no desire to look back. 10 steps from the car, I dug in my pocket looking for my keys. For a brief, terrifying moment, I couldn't find them. Then I dug a little deeper and came away with my prize. I hit the remote to unlock the car and dove into the driver's seat. The engine had just roared to life when the monster appeared. I threw the car in reverse and stomped on the gas, whipping around and making the monster miss crashing through the windshield. I jammed it into drive and floored it as the monster recovered and started after me. For a long, horrid moment, it seemed to be catching up to me. The road was gravel and had several potholes in it. I found myself swerving to miss the biggest ones so my car wouldn't bottom out. But by doing so, the monster gained ground. It was almost within reach of my rear bumper when I slid sideways onto the main road. Once on the pavement, I floored it and watched with satisfaction as the monster fell behind. I breathed a sigh of relief as I relaxed and settled in for the ride home. It wasn't long until I was pulling into my driveway and parking. My head fell back against the headrest, and I was tempted to take a nap right there when my nose reminded me of the state of my pants. Walking in empty-handed was a mixed blessing. I'd left hundreds of dollars in equipment behind, but at least I was alive. My shower called to me. I stripped, threw my pants and underwear in the trash, then settled into the longest, most rewarding shower of my life. After drying, I threw on a Metallica t-shirt and a pair of shorts. I came back out to the living room and settled in to watch a movie. Horror was out. I knew I'd have nightmares for weeks about my ordeal. I decided to watch an episode of Wipeout. 3 episodes later, I found my eyelids fighting gravity and exhaustion. Heading to bed, I turned out the lights and stepped up to the living room window. Looking out over the lights of town, I sighed, seeing the trees of the park far in the distance, and knowing I'd never visit there again. Before I turned toward my bedroom, something caught my eye. It was impossible. I rubbed my eyes to be sure. The monster was creeping out of the woods and coming straight toward my house. As I watched, it looked up and saw me. Our eyes locked, mine full of fear, its full of menace. I ran through the house making sure every door and window was locked. After that, I went to my bedstand and pulled out my snub-nosed .38, checking to make sure it was loaded and grabbing a handful of extra bullets, shoving them in my pocket. Running back out to the living room, I looked out the window, but it was gone. Pressing my face against the glass, I searched the front yard, but it wasn't there. For an instant, I wondered if my imagination had been playing tricks on me. I went to the kitchen window and looked into the backyard. It was dark, and I couldn't see much. Reaching for the light switch, I hesitated, not wanting to see it suddenly appear in front of me, but I had to know if this thing was real or not. I would rather that I was going crazy than ever see that thing again. Flicking on the light, I took a half step back. Nothing was there. I scanned the entire backyard, all the way to the woods that bordered my property. Nothing. I shrugged and was about to go to bed when I heard it. My foot stopped on the first step, and I turned back toward the door. Someone or something was scraping against the front door. Feeling like I was in a trance, I was drawn to the door. Leaning up to the peephole, I closed my eyes and breathed a silent prayer that nothing would be there. My prayers were answered. There was nothing out there. As tempted as I was to just accept this audible hallucination, my shaking hand reached for the doorknob. The distance between my hand and the door seemed to fade, like one of those scenes in a horror movie where the camera zooms in while going backward. I turned the knob and held my breath while opening the door. Nothing was there. I released a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Looking around, the yard was empty, just the evening mist clinging to the lawn. My imagination had gotten the best of me. I turned to go back inside and saw the door and door frame had long scratches on it. My blood froze. It was real. It was here. It had tracked me down. As terror gripped me, I saw a flash of brown fur an instant before it charged me. In sheer desperation, I fell back into the door just as it hit the doorframe. Its antlers slammed into the doorframe, sending splinters flying as it struggled to get loose from the destroyed wood. I lay on the door, watching in grim fascination, stunned by the fact that it had missed gouging my eyes by a mere fraction of an inch. The doorway had saved me, the same doorway that was rapidly disappearing under the monster's onslaught. I regained myself and ran. As I darted through the living room, somehow I had the presence of mind to grab the house phone and dial 911 as I headed down the basement steps, slamming the door behind me. 911, what's your emergency? Came the lady operator's voice. I'm being chased by a monster who's trying to kill me, I said, vaulting down the stairs. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I'm being chased by a monster who's trying to kill me. Are you talking about a person? No, what do you not understand about the word monster? I shouted. Alright, it's my duty to inform you that prank calls will be reported to the police and you could face charges. Fine, send the cops, maybe they can fight off the monster long enough to put me in cuffs. The line disconnected. Son of a, I said as I heard the monster stalking around inside the house. I squeezed myself into the far corner between the wall and the oil tank and tried to be as quiet as possible. Barely breathing, I listened to its measured steps as it crept from room to room. The floorboards complained with loud creaks, telling me this thing weighed considerably more than me. I heard it turn toward the stairs and thought about making a run for the cellar door that led outside when my phone rang. Hello, I screamed, trying to be as quiet as possible. Is this the person who just called 911 about a monster? Yes, who is this? There was a pause as I heard the footsteps change direction. I'm from another agency, he said. Could you describe the monster for me? So you're from one of those 3-letter agencies that always say they don't spy on our phone calls. Could you describe the monster for me? It's huge, I whispered. At least 8 feet tall, covered in fur, and wearing the fur of another animal over its shoulders. Oh, and it has antlers like a deer. I heard a sharp intake of air. Where is it? I gave him my address. I meant, where is it in the house? It's on the first floor and I'm in the basement, I whispered. But I think it's coming down here. Just then I heard the basement door open. Gotta go, I whispered, then hung up the phone. The basement stairs groaned under the weight. I hoped that the wood would collapse under the weight and it would fall, snapping its neck. No such luck. The stairs creaked as it continued to the bottom. I had to duck in this basement so I was sure it was on all fours to keep from getting tangled in the rafters. My heart pounded. I struggled to keep my breathing quiet so I wouldn't give away my position. The chuffing of the monster's breathing was getting closer. I wanted to close my eyes but had to know when it came close enough. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the gun. Aiming it at the corner, I waited. The skeletal snout appeared, but I didn't shoot. The shot would just bounce off of bone. I wanted to hit something more vital and hope that I might somehow survive. The rest of the bony skull made its appearance and went by without noticing me. Next came the neck and the rest of the body. I wasn't sure where this thing's vital organs were, so I held off, hoping that it might not notice me at all. Those hopes were dashed when it sniffed, then whipped around and stared right at me. I took that as a sign to shoot it in the chest. The gunshot was deafening, especially in such a closed space. My ears were ringing so loud I could barely hear the monster screaming and tearing my oil tank limb from limb, trying to get to me. I fired again, trying to hit any part of its body as oil flew from it, thrashing around. We were both covered in heating oil, and yet it still kept coming. 3 more shots didn't even slow it down. It was so close the muzzle of the gun was nearly touching it. I shoved the barrel in one of its eye sockets and pulled the trigger. The flame from the exploding gunpowder set the oil on fire. I don't know if it was that or the bullet bouncing around in its skull that made it shriek even louder. Flame engulfed its screaming form, making it look like a demon straight from hell. It ran out of the basement through the outside doors, bursting out into the open air and disappearing into the night. I was so relieved I didn't notice right away that I was on fire. The oil that had splashed on me had ignited when the monster caught fire. I tried to push my way out quickly, but the monster had shoved the tank closer to the wall, pinning me. The fire devoured the oil on my clothes and my bare skin, making me scream in agony as I tried in vain to get away from the fire. This was it. I would die this horrible, agonizing death, trapped in an inferno. The monster would get its revenge and not even know it. Maybe once it extinguished its own fire, it would come back and devour what was left of me, like a well-done steak. I must have been hallucinating. I could have sworn a cloud enveloped me just before I died. I woke in a white room with an annoying beeping sound that wouldn't stop. There was a smiling face sitting in the corner staring back at me, attached to a man I'd never met. "How are you feeling?" he said, stepping over to the hospital bed. "Am I dead?" I rasped. "Not yet," he chuckled. "It was close though. If we hadn't gotten to you when we did, you would have been a shish kebab." I tried to lean up, but pain put me back in the bed. "Yeah, you're not gonna be taking any hiking trips for a while," he said. "You've got burns all over your legs that'll need some time to heal." "I'm never going hiking again," I said. "Are you the guy I talked to on the phone?" "Yeah, do you mind telling me the rest of what happened?" he said, pulling out a pen and notepad. "Sure," I said, shrugging. "Since you saved my life, it's the least I could do." He pulled his chair over and got comfortable. "What happened to the monster anyway?" I said. He hesitated. "It got away, didn't it?" "Yeah," he said, lowering his head a little. "We lost the trail after it extinguished itself, but don't worry, we'll find it." I didn't comment on my opinion of the competency of government agencies out of respect for the man who saved my life, but suffice it to say I wouldn't be sleeping very deeply once I got back home. "Where would you like me to start?" I said. "The beginning is always a good place." A week later, I walked out of the hospital, literally. The doctors said I'd been very lucky. Because I'd been sweating, the oil didn't stick to my skin. Since oil and water don't mix, it was literally floating on top of the sweat on my legs. Even though I did receive some burns, they weren't nearly as bad as they could have been. I guess I'm just one lucky guy. Now I get to go home and barricade myself in my house, hoping that thing forgets about me, or better yet, that it had died from its burn injuries. When I got home, I walked up to the front door and saw the scratches on it. I took the steps one at a time, looking at the door frame where it had gotten stuck, trying to gouge my eyes out. I opened the front door slowly, as if expecting it to be waiting behind the door to nab me and drag me off into the forest to do unspeakable things to me. I released my white knuckles from the doorknob, then quickly shut and locked the door. Splinters and sawdust covered the carpet, along with muddy, inhuman footprints. After doing a quick walkthrough of the house to make sure it wasn't there, I grabbed the vacuum and started cleaning. I had just finished when a knock at my door nearly sent me through the ceiling. Peeking out through the peephole, I saw the man who'd saved me that night and opened the door. "What are you doing here?" I said. "I came to check on you," he said. "Mind if I come in?" I stepped aside and motioned for him to enter. He stepped in and scoped out the room. It's surprisingly clean for having a Wendigo nearly destroy it. "I just got done vacuuming." He eyed me up and down. "Of course you did," he said, plopping into a comfortable chair. "So, how goes the hunt?" I said, sitting in my usual chair. He shifted in his seat. "It's going well." "So you've captured it then?" "Not exactly." "Killed it?" He shook his head. "Then what have you done?" "I saved your life." "And I thank you. What have you done lately?" "Well, that's kind of what I'm here for," he said. "How would you like to join our team?" "Team of what?" "Cryptid hunters." I looked at him with sheer disbelief. "Pass. You haven't even heard." "I don't want anything to do with that thing," I said, walking into the kitchen. "But you're the only one who's ever survived an attack." I wondered to myself if that was true, or if he was just trying to make my pride force me into a bad decision. "Pass," I said. "You wouldn't be going alone," he said, getting up and following me to the kitchen. "There's 2 other cryptid hunters that would be along, plus me." "Not interested," I said. "There's a reward for its capture. You'd get a share of it." "No deal," I said, starting up the stairs. He seemed flustered, grasping at straws. "You'd get to carry a big gun," he said. I paused halfway up the stairs. "How big of a gun?" "Big." I thought about it for a long moment. "All right," I said, then continued up the stairs. "Great, then let's go." I paused. What do you mean, let's go? Like right now? I just got home. We need to strike while the trail is fresh. Fresh? A week old is fresh. He shrugged. The guys and your equipment are in the truck. Can I at least grab a shower first? There was an odd look in his eye. No need, he said. We'll be out on the trail. We stood in a silent stare down for a long moment, then I shrugged and came back down the steps. So, how much money will I be making? I said. He smiled. Enough. I followed him outside, turning at the last moment to lock my front door that had seen better days and looked like a stiff breeze would blow it over. He grinned but said nothing as we approached the truck and climbed in the back doors. The two men in the front merely nodded when we got in, then the driver started the truck and drove away toward the woods. I wasn't having pleasant memories flash back when we pulled into the same trailhead I had barely escaped from just over a week ago. I had to wonder if I'd had some head trauma they hadn't noticed at the hospital, or if Mr. Three-Letter Government Agency had drugged me without my knowledge to get me to come back here. I was tempted to run as soon as I opened the door, but I didn't want to look like a coward in front of these guys, even though I didn't know them from Adam and they each had a good 50 pounds of pure muscle on me. We stepped around to the back and Mr. Three handed me a backpack that was so heavy it nearly pulled me over. You gonna be good with that? He said, noticing my struggle. You can take some stuff out if you want. Nope, I'm good, I said, hefting it onto my back and somehow managing to keep it there without my knees buckling under the weight. Next, he handed me a belt that had all kinds of stuff on it, including the big gun. It was a revolver, but the cylinder was so long, I wondered if it would shoot rifle shells. Just remember, he told me, we're trying to capture it, not kill it. That was never part of the deal, I said. It is if you want the big payday. I stopped in front of him. What if I want revenge? He looked me up and down, sizing me up as if seeing me for the first time. Then you should go home and leave the hunting to us, he said, then stepped around me and started down the trail. The second hunter followed him, but the third stayed behind and stared at me. Aren't you following them? I said. I'm the rear guard, he said. I go last and watch everybody else's back. So, you're waiting to see if I follow them or tuck my tail between my legs and slink home? Pretty much, yeah. I looked from the trail to the road and back again, then slumped my shoulders and started down the trail. So, what do I call you? I said over my shoulder to the hunter behind me. He was silent for a moment, then softly said, You can call me Ray. My mind shot back to an old comedy routine I'd seen on one of those classic TV shows. Alright, Ray, I guess it's gonna be you and me for a while, because I know I won't be catching up to them with what feels like a Buick strapped to my back. He told you to take out whatever you felt you didn't need. Ever heard of this thing called pride, Ray? He shook his head ruefully. Unfortunately, yes, he said. Does that mean I can count on you to continue to make stupid decisions? I stopped and turned on him. I think the answer is obvious. Great, he said with no small amount of sarcasm. We started down the trail, and I must say I did pretty well for around a half hour. And when I say pretty well, I mean trudging, heaving, and moaning at the incredible amount of weight on my back as we slowly followed the trail through the forest. To make things worse, it started to drizzle. It didn't take too long for him to have. Enough, he said. Just stop right here. I obeyed and nearly fell over backward as gravity grabbed the backpack and tried to hurl it to the ground. If it wouldn't have been for Ray catching me, I would have hit the ground hard and rolled around like a helpless turtle, unable to get up on my own. He lifted the pack off my back effortlessly and set it on the ground. He dug through it and started thrusting things toward me. Here, he said, shoving a handful of granola bars toward me. Put these in your pants pockets. Next, he handed me a flashlight and some extra rounds of ammo, a water bottle, and a rain poncho. I took the poncho out of its wrapper and put it on. The first few steps I took sounded like I was wearing a snowsuit. Everything he'd given me to stow in my pockets made some kind of noise. The granola bar wrappers rubbed together, the rounds of ammo clinked and clicked, even the rain poncho made noise when I took a step. I thought we were trying to sneak up on this thing, I said, stopping in my tracks. I sound like a freaking one-man band. "Don't worry about it," he said, avoiding my eyes as he set the pack off to the side of the trail and stepped past me. "I'm sure the rain will cover your sounds." I looked up and only a few drops landed on my cheeks. The rest was just a fine mist. Narrowing my eyes, I watched as Ray walked ahead of me on the trail. I hadn't known him long, but it was easy to see he was hiding something. Maybe he didn't want to scare me, so I would keep on with the search. In any case, I rested my hand on the gun in its holster for comfort. "Don't go pulling that out unless you have to," he said without looking back. "Remember, we're here to capture, not kill." "Maybe you are," I said. He stopped dead in his tracks and turned toward me. "Look, I get it. You're scared. I would be too if this was the first time I was hunting something like this, but you have to do things our way so no one gets hurt, understand?" He hadn't said it a threatening way, just matter of fact, but I still found myself taking a step back. What if that thing decides it wants to hurt someone? He looked me in the eyes. "Then we stop it," he said, then turned and started down the trail, not even checking to see if I was following. I sighed and fell in step behind him, finding it much easier now without the heavy pack of doom weighing me down. I still rested my hand on the gun as we walked. The forest was quiet. The animals weren't making much sound and the wind was still. I didn't know if it was the intensifying rain or something else that seemed to spook them. "Ray," I heard someone whisper. He stopped and whipped around on me. "What?" he said, looking at me. I didn't say anything. His eyes were full of suspicion, but he continued along the trail. It wasn't long until we heard the sound again. "Ray, His eyes instantly shot to me, but I held up my hands in surrender and shook my head. He scanned the trees, looking for where the voice had come from when we heard it again. This time he was able to focus in on where it had come from. He started toward it without a second glance at me. "Wait a minute," I whispered. "Are you sure you want to follow this?" "Of course," he said, but his eyes had an otherworldly quality to them, like he'd been hypnotized or somehow was under the voice's spell. He stepped forward slowly, but not carefully. It was as if he were being drawn and started walking into the woods in front of me. He had almost disappeared when suddenly, the creature appeared as huge and real as ever. Its skin was burned all over its body and hanging loosely in some places like it was about to fall off. It was much more terrifying than the last time I'd seen it. Even the hide of the other animal that it wore as a shawl seemed melted to its shoulders. It slashed Ray across the throat in one lightning-fast motion. All I saw was a spray of red before the creature picked Ray up and started off into the woods. Before I knew what was happening, my gun was in my hand and I was firing it over and over at the beast as it escaped with its prize. I fired the gun empty, but kept squeezing the trigger on empty cylinders. Finally, I realized I wasn't shooting anymore and emptied the shell casings out, digging into my pocket to reload and dropping bullets in my haste. Once I finally had it reloaded, I slammed the cylinder shut and looked for the creature. To my surprise, 2 trees came toward me. I aimed the shaking gun toward them when one of them said, "Stop, don't shoot us." It was so shocking to hear a tree talk that I obeyed its command. They continued to advance on me when they stopped a few feet away, and one of them ripped its top off, revealing a human head. It was the agent. "Give me that gun," he said with an outstretched branch. "Absolutely not," I said, holding it away from him like a kid withholding a toy from a parent. "Where have you two been?" The other agent removed his treetop as well. "We were staking out the area," he said. "You two were supposed to bring it to us so we could capture it." "Bring it to you? How were we supposed to do that?" He stared at me for a long time, looking as though he was unsure of what to say. I finally got it. "You used me as bait," I said. "You knew once that thing got my scent it would follow me." He shrugged. "It was as good a plan as any. Except, it caught on to your little plan and now Ray is in harm's way and could already be dead." "What do you mean dead?" he said. I described him being taken with a special emphasis on the blood spray. He stared at me silently. "We need to regroup and think what our next tactic is." "Our next tactic is to find this thing and put as many holes in it as possible before it has Ray for an afternoon snack," I said, holding up the gun for emphasis. "I told you, we're bringing it in alive." "Even at the cost of our lives," I said, looking from one agent to the other. My point seemed to sink in grudgingly with both of them. "We still need to find it," the head agent said. "After we find it, we can debate killing it or not." "Fine, this way," I said, starting in the same direction I'd seen the creature and Ray disappear. "Who died and made you boss?" he said, following as quickly as his tree outfit would let him. I turned and faced him, serious as a heart attack. "Hopefully not Ray," I said, then turned and resumed in the direction I'd seen them. I didn't turn back to see if they were following, but I could hear trees rustling behind me. I hoped that was them or I was in trouble. As we walked, my senses were on alert, watching and listening for the creature in hopes that it wouldn't pull another sneak attack. Thinking back to the brief battle, I wondered how many of my 6 shots hit the beast and how many might have hit Ray. I couldn't be that careless in the upcoming fight. I would have to take better aim and be patient. Not only was there Ray to think of as a potential victim, but also the 2 clowns behind me dressed up as trees. We weren't on any trail, and that made it rough going for me. My legs were still sensitive and I had rushed out of the house in just a pair of shorts and a Metallica t-shirt. The rain poncho I wore gave me a little warmth, but not as much as I would have liked. When we left, it was nice out, with the temperature in the mid-70s, but once the rain started, it dropped 10 degrees. That plus the fact that we were walking through rough country, avoiding jaggers, thorns, and all kinds of plants that seemed like they were designed just for the annoyance factor. I can't imagine how those 2 behind me were doing in their ridiculous tree outfits. I turned to check on them, but they were gone. Slowly looking around the forest, I searched for them, but they were nowhere to be found. With their outfits on, they could have been right beside me, and I wouldn't know it. They also admitted to using me as bait. Maybe that's what they were doing again. I wish I would have stayed home, ordered a pizza, and watched Wipeout on TV, then fallen asleep on the couch. That would have been a good first day home from the hospital. Instead, I was freezing in the middle of the woods, all alone, and now that I had looked around, I lost which direction I was going. So now I was officially lost in the woods. Great. The rain was coming down harder now. I decided to look for some kind of shelter and regroup. I walked forward, looking not for the creature, but anything I could use to hide from the rain. A cave would be great, as long as nothing was in it. A fallen tree that I could sit under would do as well. In the end, I lucked out. I hadn't gone far when a cave appeared up ahead. Instead of blundering inside, I circled around and watched the entrance for a while until I was cold enough to ignore the potential danger and get out of the rain. Standing in the mouth of the cave helped a little by getting me out of the rain, but I was still freezing. I turned and looked inside. The huge maw of blackness stared back out. Even using my flashlight didn't tell me much about my impromptu rest stop. Hanging out near the entrance was not advised. I would have to find someplace else once the rain stopped. But as I looked up, a flash of light, followed soon by a crash of thunder that made the world shake, told me the rain wasn't about to let up. Cold as I was, it would take a special kind of crazy to go exploring this cave that could hold any number of wild animals who had no problem eating humans. I hoped one of them wouldn't be the creature. What did the agent call it, a Wendigo? Against every survival instinct, I shone my light into the cave and started walking. It was big, at least 12 feet from the ceiling, but the walls were smooth, almost like it had been dug with a machine. There weren't a lot of rocks and debris like you would envision in a cave. It seemed like someone had made this cave and concealed it as natural. But why? There was nothing out here in the middle of the woods. Even the cave itself was far off the beaten path. As I was wondering about the nature of the cave, I heard a sound behind me. Slowly I turned, hoping that the creature hadn't snuck up behind me like it did with Ray. All I saw was 2 trees standing on either side of the cave. "You've gotta be kidding me," I said. Like no one's going to notice 2 trees suddenly growing in the middle of a cave with no sunlight. Neither tree moved, but I was sure one of them make a shushing sound. I shook my head and continued into the cave. The further I went, the more the flashlight struggled to ward off the dark. It was like the light was overwhelmed by the darkness. As big as the cave was, I came to a spot where it opened up into a larger room. The ceiling was so far up it was hard for the flashlight to reach. As I scanned around the room with the light, I settled on something over in the corner. The closer I got to it, the more I wanted to turn around and leave. I stepped up right beside it and pulled my shirt collar up over my nose to cover the stench of death and decay. It was Ray, or what was left of him, strung up on a rack. Both his legs were gone and the huge puddle of blood under him didn't give me hope that he had survived. I reached up and felt for a pulse anyway. My hand went right into the opening where the creature had slashed his neck. There was no pulse. At least I didn't see any bullet holes in him. That made me feel a little better. I hung my head and turned to report to the trees following me when I saw a sight that made me question reality. The creature had returned. It was in a life and death battle with a tree. It had picked the tree up and was holding it near the top. The tree was kicking and punching the creature as though its life depended on it. The creature seemed confused at first, but once the tree delivered a well-placed kick, the creature seemed to decide that it had enough. It swung the tree around effortlessly like a baseball bat and smashed it into a wall. The sickening crunching sound it made on impact were a combination of wood and bone breaking. The tree instantly went limp, but the creature wanted to make sure. It threw the tree at the other wall, leaving a red splotch on impact before collapsing to ground. The second tree hadn't moved the entire time. The creature stepped close to it, suddenly suspicious. It reached out when I made my decision to act. I pulled out the gun, aimed at the creature's head, and squeezed the trigger. I'd never fired a .44 Magnum in a cave before, and I never will again. My ears were ringing so bad I couldn't hear anything. I saw the tree holding its ears as well as the Wendigo. Its mouth was open and I imagined it was screaming, but I couldn't hear it. I don't know what happened, if something in me just snapped or I realized I was about to end up like Ray. I ran up to the Wendigo while it was disoriented by the gunshot, stuck the gun under its chin near its neck and squeezed the trigger 5 more times. The top of its head exploded with a geyser of bone and blood. It screamed so loud I even heard it through my hopefully temporary deafness. I didn't hang around to see what was going to happen. I ran toward the cave entrance, grabbing the uninjured tree and pulling him out with me. It only took a moment for the tree to get the point and run along. Once out, he guided me back to the trail and took the top of his tree disguise off to talk to me. "I told you I wanted that thing alive," he said, looking and sounding very unhappy. "Why don't you tell Ray and the other agent you just lost how that thing's life was more important than theirs?" He glared at me. "Don't give me that look," I said. "I just shot a Wendigo at point-blank range. You think your little glare is going to frighten me?" He continued to glare. "Okay, you have 2 choices here," I said. "Either drive me home or give me your keys." He finally allowed his shoulders to relax and started walking. "I'm not giving you the keys to my car," he muttered. We walked back out in silence. Whatever his deal was with bringing the creature in alive, he was serious about it. I was just glad the whole ordeal was over. "Do you think it's dead?" I said. He ignored me for a few minutes, then finally said, "I don't know. I've heard some amazing stories about how they recuperate." "Wow, gee thanks, I feel so much safer now," I said as we rounded a corner and there standing in the middle of the trail was a huge bear. We both froze. "What do we do?" I whispered to him. "Shut up," he whispered back. We stood as still as humanly possible as the bear sniffed the air and lumbered up to us. For some reason it looked familiar. Could it possibly be the same bear that fought with the Wendigo over a week ago? It had some scars and scratch marks on it that looked partially healed. It stepped up to the agent and stared at him. Perhaps it had never seen a tree partially eat a human before. That's what he looked like with the top of the outfit off. Like the tree had half digested a human the way a snake devours its prey. Then it stepped over and sniffed me. Its eyes grew wide with what I would almost call fear, but that couldn't be right, could it? I mean, why would a bear be afraid of me? It turned tail and ran off into the woods without looking back. "What was that about?" I said. "Do you really want to question it, or just get out of here?" "Get out of here," I said, my feet already double timing it down the trail. We were within sight of the car before we slowed down. Both of us were breathing hard from power walking the whole way. I was sure it couldn't have been easy for him in that tree suit. "I think I may have figured it out," he said as we arrived at the car and he fished out his keys. "Do tell, a wise one," I said. "It smelled the Wendigo's blood on you." "What difference does that make?" "Think about it. If you're enough of a badass to have Wendigo blood on you, the bear probably didn't want to mess with you." I thought about it, and it made sense in a way. Just as we were about to leave, we heard an inhuman shriek off in the distance. He turned to me with a gleam in his eyes. "Oh no," I said. "You take me home right now, then I don't care if you go try to hunt this thing down and end up getting eaten." "Oh, alright," he said, pouting. We drove in silence, each of us in our own world of thoughts. Every once in a while I couldn't help glancing in the rear-view mirror just to be sure. When we arrived at my house, I got out and turned to leave, then stopped. "Why was that cave man-made?" I said. "What makes you think it was man-made?" he said with a nervous chuckle. "The walls and ceiling were too smooth," I said. "They seemed rough enough to me," he said. "So you're not going to tell me that there was a secret military base nearby?" "You enjoy your recuperation, sir," he said, handing me a business card. "If you ever have problems like this again, give me a call." I dropped the card on the seat. "I think I'd be better off on my own," I said. "You don't protect your partners very well." I walked inside my house without looking back. Hello, I hope you're having a fantastic day. I can't share who I am and I can't even share my name with you, so for the future of this document I will refer to myself as Pepper. There's not much I can tell you about the day-to-day details of my job, but I can say that in this world there's plenty of supernatural things, creatures that can't be comprehended, cryptids, ghosts, even local horror stories. All of them are rooted in some sort of truth. It's my job to kill these things or at the very least protect the public from them. I tell you this because I believe everyone should know the creatures that go bump in the night are actually there. I want to start with an interview I had with the victims of one of these supernatural attacks. The document you read has been transcribed from audio to text. The name of the victim has been changed in order to keep their identity a secret. Tape begin 5:02 a.m. Pepper, Sarah, is it? Sarah, yes, that's me. Pepper, hello Sarah, my name's Pepper. I understand you've been through hell tonight, which makes sense if you find yourself in my office. Sarah, are you sure I'm safe here? What if it comes back for me? What if... Pepper, Sarah, I assure you nothing will get you while you're in this office. Now Sarah, I need you to explain everything that's happened. No matter how insane it seems, every detail, no matter how minor. If you think it's important to the story, then include it. I will inform you this whole conversation and further on will be recorded. Do you understand? Sarah, yes, I understand. Pepper, good, please begin. Sarah, it started about 3 days ago. I was at Jim's Coffee on my way to work. There was this homeless man outside the shop. He asked if I had some change I could spare. Well, you see, I hadn't slept well the night before and was in a grumpy mood. I'll admit I was an asshole. I told him to stop being a leech and go get a job. He didn't like that. Grabbing my arm, he pulled me close to him. It was like the colored part of his eyes had disappeared, and he stared into mine. "You should learn to be kinder," he said. It may not sound that scary to you, but something about the way he said it terrified me. I ended up skipping coffee that day. Pepper, this man, did he have any distinguishing details you can remember about him? Sarah, no, he seemed normal enough. Well, I guess he seemed pretty clean for being a homeless man. Pepper, interesting, please continue. Sarah, the rest of the day went on pretty normal. When I got home, my door was unlocked. It seemed weird, but I figured I just forgot. I couldn't sleep that night. I was so tired the next day that my boss sent me home and told me to get some sleep. When I got there, my door was left open. There was no way I forgot to close the door. I went into the garage because I keep a handgun in there. I went through my house checking each room. I couldn't help but think of the homeless man. I got through the whole house finding nothing. I stopped in my bathroom to wash my face. I must have been super tired to leave my door wide open. I looked up into the mirror to see a figure standing right behind me. I didn't have much time to react. I grabbed the gun from the counter and snapped before firing a shot. Nothing was there. All I did was put a bullet hole in the wall. I ended up putting some duct tape over the hole. I'll call someone in the morning. I wouldn't have been surprised if one of my neighbors called the cops. I didn't sleep again. I was stirring at every sound I heard. The constant feeling of being watched. At one point I turned over in bed to a shadowy figure standing in my doorway. I blinked and it was gone. I kept my gun on my nightstand all night. I thought there was nothing. No, I knew there was nothing to be worried about. I was just sleep deprived and I was seeing things. There was no one in the house. I was just worried and I got scared by some old homeless man. Pepper, that was a long pause. Sarah, this next part is just really hard. Pepper, take your time, we have all night. Sarah, thank you. Morning came and I called someone to come repair the hole in the wall. I didn't want to be alone in my house anymore, so I asked the repair service if I could leave a key and they could just come in to work while I wasn't home. They agreed, and I called my neighbor Scott to see if I could stay in his house for the night. He was a nice guy. Scott was a tall, skinny guy with brown hair and beautiful blue eyes. I always liked him. He let me stay and I went over immediately. I explained to him what was going on. He was supportive. We hung out most of the day and nothing weird happened. I started to think it was all in my head. I even felt safe enough to go upstairs and shower alone. I went back downstairs to go lay on the couch and sleep. Scott was just standing in the kitchen just staring at the fridge. "What are you doing, you weirdo?" I said while chuckling. He didn't respond. Something was dripping from his head. "Scott?" He turned around. Fuck. His lower jaw looked like it had been ripped out. His eyes were hanging out of their sockets. He fell to the floor. I ran to him trying to feel for a pulse. It was stupid. Who the hell could have survived that? I was just being hopeful, I guess. That's when I saw him standing near the couch in the living room. A shadowy figure, blood stained his hands. His eyes were glowing red. I was terrified. My brain was telling me to run. It was screaming at me to move. "Move your fucking legs," I screamed at myself. I moved hard, so I got out of that house and started moving through the brushes towards mine. I looked behind me to see that creature behind me, its legs moving in ways that shouldn't be possible for the human body, almost like it had no bones, and the noise it was making. "Pepper, explain the noise, this is very important." "Sarah, it sounded when you slide something heavy against a hardwood floor and scratches it." Pepper, shit. Sarah, what do you mean shit? Pepper, continue the story. Sarah, I need a second to think. Sarah, I tripped sometime while in the forest, and when I did, I couldn't see it anywhere. I took my moment of peace to call the police. I tried to explain to the lady there was a shadow monster chasing me and it killed my friend, but the line was cut. I tried to call back, but there was nothing. The call wouldn't go through. There it was standing above me, its mouth open to a white glow, and something fell out of it on my forehead. It was a tooth. I'm sure it was one of Scott's. I crawled and cried as it moved towards me, mouth agape. It was gonna kill me. It grabbed me by my leg, pulling me towards it. Its mouth widened while pulling my legs in. I cried, I kicked, I screamed. I did everything in my power to escape. It all seemed hopeless, but then nothing short of a miracle happened. I heard the beautiful sound of a shotgun racking a shell before the loud gunshot. The round blew a hole through the creatures and it screamed in agony. I couldn't help but laugh at its misery. It let go of me and scurried off into the woods. The man with the gun took my hand and led me to his truck. Next thing I know, I was here in your office. Pepper, thank you, Sarah. This interview has brought a lot to the table, and I think I know what we are dealing with. My associate outside will take you to a place you'll be safe until we can deal with the entity. I promise you have nothing to worry about. Sarah, thank you. Tape end 6:17 a.m. I lied to Sarah, and while I truly feel bad about it, I was left with no other choice. See, the creature is something I've dealt with before, and it always ends the same way. The entity which the organization has named a Yonder. Yonders hunt those who fail the test brought upon by it. The test can present itself in many different ways, from an actual physical test to a morality test. In Sarah's case, I believe the test was the old man asking for change. After she was rude and failed to give the man the change, the Yonder chose her as the target. The thing about Yonders is they are relentless in their hunt. They will kill anyone who gets in the way of their target. Their goal isn't simply to kill their target, but to consume them whole. Yonders cannot be killed, and it's best to give them what they want in order to avoid more bloodshed. Sarah could have avoided Scott's death if she simply never got him involved. But that being said, I must inform you of Sarah's eventual fate. I'm sure you could guess this, but she is dead. Sarah and my associate outside, who was also listening to the interview and had already figured it was a Yonder. 6:31 a.m., he went to a nearby motel which is owned by the organization. There, my associate left Sarah and went to his car to smoke, knowing by the time he was finished, she would be gone. He heard her scream and didn't return to the room until the screaming had finished. Just like that, Sarah was gone. I know you might think wrong of me and the organization I work for, but I assure you I did what would result in the smallest loss of life. While Sarah's death was unfortunate, it was necessary. While yonders are one of the many supernatural entities that roam our world, they are especially dangerous. Their test can be ultimately anything, and there is no way to know when a test has taken place. I inform you of this simply because I believe it is important to know. I leave you with this story with this one bit of advice. Always be scared. Hello, it's Pepper again. I appreciate everyone who took the time to read the last story. However, I like to emphasize the point of the story was not for entertainment but as a tale to be wary. People of the world are ignorant of the horrors around them, which is partially the fault of the organization I work for. I have another one for you, and this one is especially scary to me. Unlike the yonder from my last story, which has been documented several times and is somewhat understood by the organization, there are only 2 living people who have seen and survived this entity I'm about to list. I am one of them. This was almost 11 years ago. I had only worked at the organization for roughly 5 months. This was the first case I was ever allowed on. I was a level 4 field agent at the time, which meant I wasn't allowed to be on a case alone and had to be placed with a level 2 field agent. The organization doesn't require you to be a tank of a human to work there. Due to the high turnover rate, most field agents don't live past their first year. I'm a short guy, not very muscular myself, and the only thing that kept me alive this long was my brain. The other agent I was placed with was in their 3rd year, and he has seen some shit. I didn't even meet the other agent till we arrived on the site. He was the exact opposite of me, tall, muscular, wearing a dress shirt, scars covered his hands, and he had one on his chin, and he had a fucking sword, along with 2 handguns, 9mm Berettas. I, on the other hand, had a flashlight and .38 revolver. At the time, I was young and I thought he looked badass. Despite his massive size, people took to calling him Mouse. Most agents had some sort of code name. No, I won't tell you how I ended up with the name Pepper. So first case, said Mouse. Yeah, well, first one where everyone isn't dead when I get there. I wouldn't be too sure about that. Most of these missing person cases usually end with us finding the bodies. There are a lot more cold cases than I care to admit. Mouse's voice was much softer than you would expect from looking at him. They give you the details, he said. Yeah, several missing persons have been reported around the area. Ages range from 14 to 44, 4 males and 6 females. You got 2 things wrong. First, 7 females have been reported missing. When was the 7th? Yesterday, a 9-year-old girl. That was the second thing you got wrong. I know it's my job and all, but someone so young going missing kinda shook me. The worst part is she was almost definitely dead. If there was a chance she was alive, we wouldn't be here and the police would be dealing with it. Even knowing that information, I still asked, "You think she's still alive?" He ignored my question. I knew it was stupid to ask. "They tell you about the sawmill?" he asked. "Yeah, it's abandoned and seems to be the center of the disappearances. There's a legend of a cult back in the 80s that used to meet there right after it closed down. Long story short, the cultists went there one night and they all just floated away. The lady who told me framed it as a way to keep kids away from the place," he said. "That's what I'd guess. You always listen to the legends around, especially if we're in small towns like this. Those legends can say a lot more than most people can. I learned to live by that rule. The sawmill is what you would expect from something straight out of the 80s. It was in surprisingly good condition for something abandoned for that long. There was a large wooden building surrounded by smaller ones. Large metal pieces stuck out of them. The whole place did seem eerie. I think we split and check the smaller buildings, then we'll meet at the large one," said Mouse. "Yeah, I'll take the left." I moved my way towards the building. It reminded me of a barn. It was red with white stripes and had 2 large swinging doors. Despite that, I decided to go through the smaller door on the right. It didn't want to budge at first. I had to put my whole weight into it to get it open. It fell off one of its hinges and kinda hung by the other one. The building was just for storage. It had a ton of logs. The wood had begun to rot and it smelled like shit in there. I pulled my revolver just in case. I made my way through the rows of logs, being careful to check each corner. At the end of the final row, I found what made the place smell so bad. It was a deer carcass. It was small and decaying. You would have thought it was young, till you saw its head in perfect condition, still with large antlers. I pulled my camera, which every agent had, took a picture for later. Besides that, there was nothing of interest there. I left and made my way toward the main building. I found Mouse at the main entrance. "Anything on your end?" he asked. "Found a dead deer," I said. "Yeah, mine was just for equipment storage. Nothing interesting. However, something's blocking the main entrance. We can't get in through this way. There is another door up to the right. It's on a balcony, so we'll have to climb." Like I said, not very fit, so climbing up was hard. Mouse, on the other hand, scaled the side with no effort. The door on the balcony wasn't even locked, and we made our way inside. In contrast to the outside, the inside was disgusting. It was old, falling apart, and full of dirt and cobwebs. What you'd expect from an abandoned building. In the area we were in, you could load the logs into machinery. The main entrance is where they would bring trucks to load the logs. Honestly, it seemed normal until we came across the stairs. These stairs lead down, and that made no sense. They have no reason to build a basement here. At least to my knowledge, they wouldn't. The stairs, just like the outside, were in great condition. They didn't belong there though. They were nice, like what you see in Victorian-style mansions. The wood was waxed, not scratched on them. I didn't want to go onwards. Seemed off. I told Mouse we should get back up first. He didn't listen and just started walking down the stairs. I followed. It got dark quickly. I pulled out my revolver and my flashlight. Mouse did the same, and I couldn't even tell you where he was storing that flashlight. "It's so dark, like it's eating the light," I said. "Yeah, it's too dark." The stairs went on for an impossibly long time. By the end, I was starting to get tired. I was so relieved when we reached the end. That relief was short. The room was way darker than the stairs. Even with the lights, we could only see 5 feet or so in front of us. We walked through the room. About every 30 feet or so, we would see a pillar. This place seemed wrong, like whoever built it didn't know what a pillar was even used for. Then we came across something. It was large and round and looked like an egg. I was the first one to touch it. It's squishy," I said. "What the fuck? Don't touch it," yelled Mouse. His face was pale. I looked back at it and I figured out why. The thing I was touching wasn't some weird blob like I had first thought. I saw the ears, the eyes, the nose. It was a human. Their head had swelled at a tremendous rate and their body had shrunk. They were floating almost like a balloon. It was horrifying to look at. "Kiki, kill me," it whispered faintly. It was still alive. Suddenly, the darkness seemed to fade and our flashlights were now able to shine up to 40 or so feet in front of us. Looking up, we saw more balloon humans. Off a quick head count, there were 11 of them, 7 females and 4 males. It was the missing people. One of them was visibly smaller and I knew it was the little girl. We were barely able to collect our thoughts before the humming started. It was off tune. Whoever was humming didn't have a human voice. We were snapping around trying to find whatever was humming. When my eyes met it, the singing started. My mother gave me a red balloon. Oh, we were such pals. Oh, I love this red balloon. Oh, it was my gal. Then I lost my red balloon. Oh, how the fun shall end. Oh, won't you be my red balloon? Oh, won't you be my friend? The entity's voice was scratchy. After finishing its song, it stood from its sitting position. We both had our guns locked on it. In its right hand, it held a pointy piece of wood, and its left held a sickle. I have a hard time remembering what it looked like due to the short time we had to look at it. It had on a green outfit reminiscent of the outfit Robin Hood wore in the cartoon minus the hat. It was short, maybe 4 feet tall. Its skin looked wooden like an old doll. Its eyes were human though. That's all the details I can remember. Mouse began yelling at it to drop its weapon. It took a step forward before either of us could react. It was on us. The sickle it held made contact with Mouse's left eye, blinding him in it. I shot at it twice. It was quick to react and threw the wood at me while dodging both shots. The wood impaled me in my stomach, making me bleed from my mouth somehow. It cut the holster with Mouse's sword and other handgun. They both fell to the ground. I shot 4 more times and even managed to hit its chest. A yellow viscous fluid shot out from the hole. That slowed it down enough for Mouse to play the hero card and grab it. "Shoot it," he yelled. I tried, but I had no shots left. It sliced off Mouse's arm and he let go. It ran further into the darkness. I didn't want to let it go, so I picked up Mouse's other handgun and went after it. I figured missing an arm, Mouse would die anyway from the blood loss. Even with my flashlight, it had the advantage. I wasn't the hunter in this situation. It began singing its song again. I realized the meaning of the song this time. It kept making noises and moving through the darkness. It was toying with me, but I wouldn't let it kill me. I was watching its movements in the darkness, and I was able to pick up on the patterns. Like I said, brains kept me alive. Just as it went behind another pillar, I shot, barely hitting one of its hands. It screamed before moving into the darkness. I ran after it, but it made its way down another staircase. I made the smart decision to retreat and call for backup. Despite what I thought, Mouse lived, making him the only other living person to see that creature. I still talk to him and even ask him for advice on cases to this day. He, however, isn't sent on many cases due to him missing an eye and arm. The case was decided to be too much for us and was placed with more experienced agents. Despite that, no one ever saw it again. It was discovered the stairs kept going for miles, and it was deemed safer just to seal it off the stairs and cut off the public from accessing the sawmill. The human balloons were taken and humanely put down. An autopsy discovered the reason their bodies had shrunk was due to their internal organs being sucked into their head, with any excess space being filled with a gas similar to helium. The fluid was tested as well as the finger of the creature, which I had shot off when I hit its hand. Its skin was similar to petrified wood, and the liquid inside was a slimy substance that has yet to be identified to this day. I often wonder whatever happened to the creature, most likely with its home being filled and no one will ever see it again. We never figured out how it balanified the others. Honestly, I think I'd rather not know. Working this job desensitizes you. I've seen so much fucked up shit that I think it's normal at this point. Just the other day I was taking a recruit on his first case and we came across a mangled corpse. I was confused as to why he threw up. I see worse stuff than that at least once a week, but that made me remember I was like that once. I was that scared kid who couldn't understand how a creature could do that. So I sat there and I tried to remember the shit I shut out. This is my story, and I don't mean some cases I choose to forget. I mean my personal story, how I ended up working a job where almost dying is pretty common, and the life and the people that I'd much rather stay forgotten. I was 20 at that time and I thought life was amazing. I was broke working a dead-end job. My family had long disowned me and my only friends were junkies and alcoholics. So why did I think life was so great? Well, it was cause I had her, my beautiful girlfriend, Josephine. I can see her now, her purple hair up in that messy bun, her snakebite lip piercings, her clunky glasses, her brown eyes. I miss those things. She was shorter than I was, and I think that's one of the things that drew me to her. But then I got to know her and we clicked. We dated for 2 years, and she moved in with me and my roommate. She was broke too, but our struggle kept us together. She liked Mike, my roommate. She tried even harder than I did to get him off the pills. But enough of that, cause that night would be the best night of my life. I saved enough for a ring and I was gonna take her to the fanciest place in town and propose. I was a mixture of excitement and anxiety. I framed the whole thing as a celebration of the promotion she just got. Arriving at home, I saw Mike coming out of his room. He looked like shit, probably coming down from a high. Mike had been my friend since middle school. I guess that's why I kept him around so long. He couldn't keep a job and what little money he had he spent on pills. I gave up trying to help him a long time ago. "Where are you going tonight? Jay's getting ready to," he asked. "We're having that celebration dinner tonight." "Oh shit, that's tonight. Fuck, let me get ready." "Who said you're coming?" "I did," Josephine said. I can still see her in that outfit. We were going to a nice restaurant, and despite having nicer clothes, she didn't dress up. She was like that, never liked being the center of attention. "We're celebrating me, so I figured my friend should come," she said. I didn't fight her, I always gave in to her. Mike coming through a thorn in my plan, but I figured I could bribe him to go away. The drive to the restaurant was full of them discussing what they would have to eat. I sat silently pissed off. Looking back at it, I'm glad he came. The restaurant was named Clive's and I don't think it's still open. I couldn't find any information on it before posting this. I'd been there once when I was little and my family still talked to me. From what I remember, the food wasn't very good, just expensive. That was the appeal, and Josephine had never been. She and Mike ordered drinks, and since I was driving, I didn't drink, though I desperately wanted to just to help calm my nerves. A man was leaving the restaurant, and at the time, I didn't think anything of him. We had our full meals, and just like I remembered, the food wasn't great. Mike and Josephine shared the same sentiment. It was time to put the plan into action. I pulled Mike to the side. I need 20 minutes with just me and Josephine. I'll give you $10 to go get a drink or snack from the gas station, I said. Shit free money, you got it, sir. Clive's was a short walk from the park where Josephine and I met. That's where I was gonna propose. We made the walk landing in front of the pond, the same place where I bumped into her on a drunken binge. That day was the first day anyone had asked me if I needed help. That day I fell in love, and she saved me. Beautiful night, she said. Not as beautiful as you, I said, pulling out the ring and bending down on my knee. What are you? Oh, Josephine, since the day you said those first words to me, I knew you were the person I wanted to love and hold, to walk through the struggles of life with, to die with. Will you make me the happiest man alive and marry me? I will, she said, tears in her eyes. I put the ring on her finger and stood up, her lips locking into mine. I was the happiest I've ever been and will ever be. My happiness turned to confusion as I saw the man running behind her, the same insignificant man from the restaurant. Normally, a man sprinting at full speed would scare anyone, but the thing chasing him was much more terrifying. Help me please, God, oh hell. His sentence was cut short as the creature jumped on his back, slamming his face into the concrete. The creature was human-like, with no clothes, but lacked genitals, so I guess it didn't need them. It was long and running on all fours. Its eyes were pure black, and its face was shaped similar to a deer. It looked at us, and I saw its mouth try to form a smile. We were its target now, and it came right for us. I don't remember anything until we made it to the car. Mike was sitting there drinking his Red Bull and eating a honey bun. We quickly hopped in and I popped it into drive. I swerved around the corner. Mike got slammed to the side in the back seat. Dude, what the fuck? He yelled. Babe, it's still behind us, Josephine said. Mike looked behind the car, watching as the creature started to gain on us. It had to be running 50 miles per hour at this point. Oh fuck, dude, drive faster. I swerved into my neighborhood and I thought I lost it. Looking back, I should have just driven to the police station or something, but I returned to my place, swinging open the door and running to Mike's room. Call the police, one of you, I said. What in the hell was that? Mike asked. Like we know, Josephine said. Mike, where's your gun? Where's your fucking gun? I yelled. I got rid of it, dude. Just then we heard it banging on the door. I grabbed Mike and Josephine and pulled them into Mike's room. It was in the house. Josephine's phone was out in the hallway. We could hear the operator answer the phone as it was crushed under the creature's feet. Mike pulled out a pill bottle, and I smacked it from his hand. It was no time to be getting high. I began trying to open the window. Mike pinned himself against the door like somehow his weight could stop it. Just as I got the window open and turned around to tell them to come through, the creature's arm went right through the wood of the door. It reached and grabbed Mike, and he desperately tried to get away. Josephine went to grab him, but it was too late for him. We both watched as it snapped his neck. I don't know if he died instantly, but I'd like to think he didn't suffer. Fear makes you stupid. We should have just got back in the car. I left it running, but no. We ran down the streets of our neighborhood yelling for help. It was 1 a.m. By this time, no one was gonna help. No one was awake to help. I had a small moment of weakness. I let go of Josephine's hand and kept running. I was 90 feet ahead of her before I even realized she had fallen. I turned around to help her, but it was there standing just over her. Me and her locked eyes, and she mouthed those words, "I love you." It hit her hard upside her head, so hard. She flopped her body and went into dead weight. I froze. I stared into the eyes of the creature. It began trying to form its smile. It walked towards me. I didn't move. I gave up. It killed the only two people who gave a shit about me, and I didn't care anymore. It could have me. I looked into the ground, waiting for my eventual fate. When I heard a loud crashing noise, I looked up to see a man getting out of the truck. The creature lay writhing on the ground in pain. I thought some random bystander hit it, but no, this man was carrying a large rifle. He placed his boot on the neck of the creature before shoving the barrel into its mouth. With one loud bang, it no longer had a head. He turned around to look at Josephine's corpse before he began walking towards me and put out his hand. "Looks like you had a real shitty night," he said. He took me to his truck and we began driving away. "Don't worry, I'll send someone for the bodies for now. Let's get you out of here." I'd later know this man as Trojan. He would be my first introduction to the organization that I now devote my life to. He also is the toughest son of a bitch I've ever met. The creature I ran into that night was one of a species. They're called Hausbrecher, and the one I met was only a juvenile. The adult ones are way worse, and if it was an adult I would have surely died. They typically stay in the wild, but when one finds themselves in a city, it's a bloodbath. The one I met that night killed 27 people in 3 days. I've met 4 other ones in my time in the organization, and while all of them have been killed, it's never blood-free. I tell this story now cause lately I feel like I've been losing my humanity. While it is beneficial in this job to hold no emotions or attachments, it's not good for a human to forget who they are. I usually don't like sleeping. It's time I could be working. But tonight I want to sleep, and even more, I want to dream of my friend. He was a junkie and a loser, but he socked someone in the mouth for even looking at me wrong. But what I want more than anything is to dream of her, the girl who changed my life when I had nothing. I no longer want to forget who I used to be, so please, if anything is up there, let me see them one more time. Thalassophobia is the fear or phobia of large and deep bodies of water. These can be lakes, rivers, or the ocean. It's become more mainstream in the last couple of years. Games like Subnautica or Iron Lung have shown people the extent of those fears. It reminds me of something from my teenage years, or should I say someone. Charles was my friend and he had thalassophobia. Like many people with the phobia, Charles was brought on by trauma. When he was only 8 years old, his father attempted to drown him. I didn't know that at the time, but to my friend group, Charles was the kid who was scared to go swimming. We tried several times to take him swimming and he'd always fight him on it. If we could get him to go, he'd sit on the sidelines. One day someone had the bright idea to force him to conquer his fears. So we drove him to where we'd commonly go cliff diving, blindfolded him and took him to the top. He fought us at first, but I convinced him to jump, and we all jumped. As I looked at him treading water, he had a smile on his face. But just as quickly as the fun started, it ended. Charles went under the water and never came back. The authorities chalked it up to him drowning, but none of us were convinced he was pulled. They never found his body. See, to me, the fear never came from what was in the water, but what could come out. I just finished my most recent case, and the creature I'd been hunting had the highest kill count of anything I've encountered. I was one of 4 agents placed on this case, which is unusual for the organization and is one of the few cases I've been on with more than 2 agents. There was me, a level 2 field agent, Flamingo level 2 field agent, Recruit Sim, a level 4 field agent, and Trojan, a level 1 field agent. I'd never worked with Flamingo and Sim was assigned under me for this case. It was his first case. "Oh man, this is nerve-wracking," said Sim. We were driving to a diner nearby from the case location. Here we'd meet with Flamingo and Trojan. "First cases are like that," I said. "Why do they call him Trojan? According to everyone at training, he's a big deal, but no one knew where the name came from." I chuckled. "I'm afraid it's not 'cause he's a badass or anything." "So he's not a badass?" "No, he's a badass. Just ask him and I guarantee he'll show you." The diner looked like every roadside diner you'd ever seen. We usually choose places like this when Trojan and I work together. Man loves 3 things in the world, and the first one is food. Walking in, I saw Trojan and who I assumed was Flamingo in a booth. "Pepper, great working with you again," said Trojan. "Nice to meet you both," said Flamingo. They had already ordered food. Trojan knew what I liked. "It's confusing though for something they deemed so dangerous to send us all out. Why would they have us bring a recruit?" Flamingo said. "It was a last-minute thing. I haven't even got a case file and was hoping you'd share yours," I said. "Of course." Trojan slid a file across the table. I picked it up first and was shocked at what I was reading. It was a campground, and a very popular one, not the first one I've been to, but this one from what I was reading shouldn't even be open. This can't be right, I said. Yeah, I thought it was a mistake too, said Flamingo. 312 missing persons in the last year. This place stayed warm year-round and was very famous. People from all over the world came to visit, but in no world should this place still be open. I handed the file off to Sim and he seemed just as surprised. You can see why they wanted all of us. Normally they'd just send me, Trojan said. I spent the rest of the meal going over the file with Sim. Arriving at the camp, we were to meet with an organization plant who worked as a forest ranger. The organization placed several people in different national parks. Parks can be a breeding ground for entities. The park grounds surrounded a large, beautiful lake. People were kayaking in it, and everyone around looked like they were having fun. I was just pissed they still had it open. I was asked to meet with the ranger while the others unpacked our stuff to put it in the cabins we were generously given for the case duration. You fish? I confusedly asked. I know the name's fucking stupid, he said. Ain't the dumbest one I've heard, I said. Look, I gotta make this brief. I may work for the organization, but I still got a park to manage, he said. I understand. Something's taking people in the night, and despite my protest, we can't get them to close the damn place down. It ain't uncommon for people to go missing, but we used to get 20 or so a year, not 300. I don't know why it took the organization so long to send you guys. We have a body that ain't the first one found either. It's over in a shed off to the east. We also have someone who claims to have seen some creature in the ranger station. I suggest you all start on those, he said. I appreciate the information. I made my way to the cabin to meet the others. Entering the cabin, I heard Sim ask, "Why do they call you Trojan? It's killing me to know." Flamingo and I started laughing while Trojan pulled out his wallet. He reached in and pulled out a condom, a Trojan condom. Sim stood there looking pissed. "You're fucking kidding me," Sim said. "I dropped this once and no one would let me live it down," Trojan said. "So what did you fuck a flamingo for your name?" Sim said. "No," Flamingo said, pulling up his pant leg to reveal a flamingo tattoo. "So what's your story?" Sim said, staring at me. "Maybe I'll tell you one day." I shared the information with them. We decided to split. Sim and I would check on the corpse, and the others would interview the person in the station. Sim seemed nervous as we walked up to the shed. I opened it. From what I'd been told, the smell was horrible. Sim threw up. It didn't affect me. The person had several broken bones. Their limbs were bent in a direction that was not possible. Their skin had been somewhat dissolved. I'd seen stuff like this before the body had been eaten and regurgitated. "So it's overeating," I said. "How can you tell?" Sim said, trying to recover from his nausea. "The body has been partially digested, but whatever did this threw it up. That leads me to think the creature has always kind of been here." "I'm not getting it," Sim said. "The park normally gets 40 or so missing persons a year. Most of those are probably from the creature, but this year the missing persons have drastically increased. I don't think that's the fault of the creature." "Something's helping it then?" asked Sim. Bingo. We met back with the others to exchange information. According to the person who had seen a monster several nights ago, he watched as a human-like creature with legs that seemed like jellyfish tendrils came from the lake and wrapped its tendrils around the person and pulled them into the lake. "Did they mention seeing anyone else?" I asked. "No, that's all the info they gave us. Said it was too dark to discern anything," said Flamingo. "I think we start patrolling the lake at night to see what we can find," said Trojan. I had to take Sim with me. I couldn't let him go on dying. The rest of us split up. We followed the edge of the water. Sim pointed out footprints leading down the lake. We followed them. They led us to a man. Sim foolishly yelled at the man to get down with his gun drawn. The man ran off into the woods and we were unable to follow. I reprimanded him. Where the man was standing, there were imprints in the dirt similar to snake tracks. Trojan found tracks similar to the ones we found. We met back at the cabin close to the morning to discuss our findings, but one of us was missing. Flamingo didn't return. 2 nights passed, and we waited for him. Sim looked like he was going insane waiting. He couldn't help but feel guilty, like somehow he was the reason Flamingo was missing. It didn't bother me or Trojan. "We can't keep sitting here waiting," I said. "I agree, we'll head out tonight," Trojan said. Sim didn't like it, and I didn't like him going. Sim's young, and this case seemed too much for a starting case. The night came and I asked Trojan to take Sim. He had much more experience than I. I returned to the spot where we saw the man, and to my surprise, he was there. I called out to him and turned to me. "The violent one isn't with you," he said. "I got him working with someone else. You're here investigating the deaths, aren't you?" I was getting closer to the man. I could pick out his details now. He was normal, with blonde hair and average height, wearing jeans and a blue hoodie. "Do you know anything about them? The deaths, I mean," I said. "I am the one feeding Dagon. Your friend made a great sacrifice." I was a few feet from now. Did I hear him right? He was feeding the creature and was calling him Dagon, the fish god. Flamingo, that must have been my friend he was talking about. I had my hand on my revolver now. "Goodbye," the man said. Just then I felt something around my ankle. I was being pulled into the lake. I barely had time to take a breath. I fought back against the thing around my ankle. Completely under the water, I could feel the creature enveloping me. Desperately trying to reach for my knife in my belt, I was getting dragged around the bottom of the water, and I could tell my arm was bleeding. I could feel the tips of my fingers on the handle of my knife. But once again, I was jerked around, moving me away, forcing me to restart the journey to my knife. I got my blade barely. I began stabbing at the tentacles. They let go, and I began desperately trying to swim toward the surface. I had no air in my lungs. I was taking in water. Just then another tentacle took me, and I had no air to fight back. I thought of Flamingo and how this is what it felt like while he was dying. Light began leaving my eyes, and if it wasn't for the angel Trojan, I'd be dead. I watched with my final bit of sight as the creature met the blade of the Trojan. I woke up on land to Sim attempting to give me CPR. "You can stop now," I said, coughing up water. "Oh God, you're alive," he said. I looked over to see Trojan next to the same creature that had taken me. He had filleted the creature, and inside were the remains of Flamingo and 2 others. I didn't know him well, but someone so experienced getting him so easily was scary. I didn't even realize the creature was there until it grabbed me so I could see how it got him. How I didn't notice though was the worst part. It was a massive 23 feet at least. Each tentacle was almost 10 feet long. It was brown, matching the color of the lake. It had 6 eyes, and its mouth was right above the tentacles. It looked like a squid somewhat, but had fins as well. Never seen anything like it. We began hearing yelling. "No, you bastards. How could you kill the Lord like that? Oh, you be punished severely, you fucking..." The voice was cut off by Trojan, who knocked him out. It was the same man I talked to. We called the organization in to clean up the creature. The man was taken in by the organization where he was interrogated. He admitted to helping feed which he called Dagon, but claimed he was being controlled by it. If that's true, then it is a first for me. Sim decided to leave the organization, claiming he wasn't cut out for the organization. I'm glad he left. I wouldn't want him to end up like me. I did almost die. That reminded me of my humanity. I can't leave the organization at this point. I spent a large part of my life here, and honestly, I can tell I don't have much time left. The Ash Mountain incident may be the most important event in the organization's history. If you tried to find information on it, you wouldn't be able to find it. At least to the event I'm referring to. When I joined the organization I work for, it was one of many at the time that dealt with the unexplainable. The Ash Mountain incident caused the merging of several of the organizations to create the superpower I now work for. If I were to talk about the entirety of the incident in detail, I could write an entire story just about that. Unfortunately, I was not there for the incident and was merely sent to deal with the aftermath. However, I can give a brief overview of the incident. The Ash Mountain incident. February 1st, 2014, 3:17 a.m. An unknown entity arrives through a hole producing a dark gray smoke in unnamed national park and is spotted by a fire tower ranger. The ranger radios to another tower and both check on the smoke. Upon arriving, they are faced with the creature. Upon making contact, one ranger solidifies into a gray statue. The second ranger touches the first, causing him to turn into an ash cloud. Ranger retreats, calling for local law enforcement. In the meantime, the creature begins making its way toward a nearby campground. One by one, it begins turning people into ash statues. When local law enforcement arrived, the creature already turned 31 people into statues. Law enforcement engages the creature. It turns 5 officers before it's injured and pushed into a nearby fallout shelter where it remains. You just read the basic case info that anyone joining the organization can access, but the paragraph doesn't prepare you for what the place looks like. In the following days, several organizations entered the fallout shelter to go after the creature. 11 days after the incident, I was sent in. I wasn't alone, sent with 2 other agents, Trojan and Wolf. Trojan was already a level 1 field agent, Wolf was level 3 and I was still level 4. We were next up on the list to go after the creature and to prove our organization was on top. We arrived near the entrance of the fallout shelter. The people weren't the only things that were ash, tree, flowers, grass. Anything living around the area had been turned into an ash statue. Like a raging forest fire had moved through the area. We made our way towards the bunker entrance. It was a large metal hatch on the ground. Looks like a cellar. Are we sure it's a fallout shelter? Wolf said. He had a deep southern accent. We lifted the hatch. After you, pretty lady, Trojan said. Haha, you so funny, I said, heading down the ladder below the hatch. When I reached the bottom, I yelled, I don't see anything. My sentence was cut off by the hatch slamming. I flipped on my flashlight and began scanning around me, the light scanning over the multiple ash statues of people. Alright, assholes, open up. I looked up only to see the ceiling was much shorter than it should have been, and the hatch was gone. I was alone amongst the ash statue. I was sure that I would be the next to grace them. I was shocked by the amount of people down here. These were all members of organizations similar to what I worked for. They were all experienced in this field. Yet they all were caught and killed by this creature. What scared me was their faces, the pure look of agony upon them. I could tell their death was painful, and the way they died froze that look right into place. You could still smell the burnt skin and hair. I found myself needing clarification with the fallout shelter itself. It was an older design, like something from the 50s. I wondered why it was so far out in the woods. The nearest town was more than 45 minutes away. A rich family owned part of the mountain and had for some time, way back before the 50s. Maybe they built it. The layout didn't make sense. Most fallout shelters aren't entire facilities underground, but that's what this was, a facility. The long hallways were still powered by the faint light of dying light bulbs. Like the place had been somewhat maintained, even through the cobwebs and dirt, signs of life remained. One room I came across had a makeshift living space, a bed made of cardboard, a lantern, blankets, old food, and water. Someone was living down here, something other than the ash entity. Whoever it was, most likely taken by the entity, just another statue among the rows of others. The whole place seemed like something you'd dream about, like a maze. Hallways lead to nowhere, rooms that seemed pointless and constantly ongoing. Between the dim light bulbs and my flashlight, I had a decent amount of light. A welcome change to most of the cases I had been on. Of course, that didn't last long. Suddenly my flashlight went out. The light bulbs followed soon after. Now I was in complete darkness. Darkness can do a lot to the human brain. When you are in complete darkness, your body has no concept of time. In my head, hours passed, but I couldn't tell you how long I was down there. On top of that, it's not uncommon for governments to use it as a torture technique. When your brain has no sense of what it's seeing, it causes it to fill in the blanks. Isolation causes you to hallucinate. You add the two together, and you get a real shitty time. Soon my head started playing tricks on me, and suddenly I could feel things moving around me. I tried talking myself out of it, telling myself there wasn't anything there, but the problem was something was down here with me. Something had to take the lights out in the first place. I had 36 bullets on me and 6 more in the gun. I could use that light to give a brief view of the room. But that came with risk, not much ammo, and I could easily hit something and the bullet could ricochet. I weighed it, but the risk was worth it. I decided to shoot down the way I thought I came from. Bang, one shot gone, giving me such a brief glimpse of light. but it was enough to see the ash demon 20 feet away. I didn't know how quick it was or how easily it could kill me. It waited this long to attack me, so something was stopping it. During the initial fight with police, it was rumored it was injured, and that's why it made its way to the shelter. Not many creatures you meet in this career fear firearms, but this one did, and that was the only advantage I had. I shot one more time where the creature had been seen. Just like I thought it was scared of the gun, it retreated further into the darkness. The lights came back on once it was gone, leading to the theory it was the one controlling the lights. With the lights back on, I reloaded my revolver and went back to freely roaming the facility. I'd been counting the ash statues. 112 were people dead. We were all sent in with barely any information, sent to die so that the higher-ups could show each other had the bigger balls. But the naive me didn't think that he was to focus on killing the creature for the glory of the organization. If I could go back now, I would slap that kid and tell him to move on with his life and that this wasn't his calling. But no, I'm that kid and I gotta live with my choices. 112 naive kids in there, and only through a miracle that I wasn't 113. I saw it again staring at me from just beyond the light of the room. It didn't take out the lights this time. I watched to figure out what it was thinking. I couldn't make out the details besides what I had seen from the flash of my firearm earlier. Looked just like the ash statues around me, but it was gray instead of black. I aimed the revolver at it and shot missing. It came at me dulling but not taking out the lights. I choose not to fight but to run. Every once in a while I look back and shoot at it. It was quick, but I had the speed advantage. I was going farther into the facility. I turned a corner and tripped over a statue. It exploded into ash and I was on the ground. It came at me. I shot it and hit its stomach. It was hurt, but knocked the gun out of my hand. I was hopeless, and just then the hatch opened above me. I hadn't even realized I'd made it back to the entrance. The ash demon began to burn and burst into its ash cloud. It died that easily. The light was what hurt, and I realized why it cut the lights in the first place. It didn't come in here cause it was hurt, just cause it was dark. I looked up to see Trojan and Wolf. I was covered in ash. "Did you kill it?" Wolf said. "Kinda. They took me out of there. I couldn't wait to shower and get all the ash off of me." Trojan stopped though to get me something to eat. I was down there for 3 hours, so he figured I must be hungry. He handed me some cheese fries. When I looked down at them, some ash fell from my hair right into. Then looking at the black dust, I couldn't figure out if it was human or the creature. "I don't think I'm hungry," I said, looking at my food. Trojan looked at it too. "What, you scared of some pepper?" Wolf said, trying to make a joke out of it. Trojan liked the joke, and for the rest of the ride, they began calling me Pepper. Guess the name just stuck. I hate that name. Hello, I'll keep this part swift. Unfortunately, I am not the man you know as Pepper. If you have read the previous parts, you have at least heard of me. People call me Mouse, but I'm not here to tell you my story. I won't keep you in the dark. Pepper is dead. I wish I could say he got out, that he went on to have a normal life, and he was no longer haunted by his work. But no, he died how he lived, buried in his work. I'm loyal to the organization I work for, and I will be to the end. So loyal that I thought about not putting this out, and even after deciding I would not use my code name. But I guess in the end I was more loyal to my friend. Pepper kept notes of all his cases. Some of the stories you read were straight out of his journal, and I'm almost surprised that he didn't make the stories as long as they are in his journal. But I understand why he didn't think this one was gonna be longer than the rest. This one coming straight out of his journal. It's his final case, the one that got him to the end. It was an honor to be part of it. Pepper's journal. Only a couple of days have passed since the last case. The organization already called me in for another one. This one was different. I walked into the same meeting I'd been in so many times before, ready to be sent on another near-death experience. Before getting my case report, I was handed something else. The director slid me a little gift box. I was confused. Was it my birthday or anniversary? I don't keep track of that stuff anymore. I opened it and was shocked. "Congratulations, Pepper," the director said. "I never thought I'd live to see this day," I said. It was a badge similar to the one I always kept on me, but with one key difference. This one said Level 1 Field Agent. That made me one of 4 agents in the organization with that rank. With that, I was given a case file. It was another unusual one I was leading, not the first one I've led, but this one allowed me to choose 2 agents of any rank to come join me. Of course, I chose Trojan. He was the number 1 agent in the organization and one of the few I knew I could trust. For the other one, I wanted Mouse with me. Even with his lack of arm and eye, he was still one of the smartest guys I knew. Through experience, I've noticed something. It doesn't matter if you are Christian, or if you are Buddhist, or if you follow Norse mythology in some capacity, they are all right. That even includes the demonic. You may think that's a little silly, but I've seen demons and I've killed them, but the problem with fighting them is if you do not believe that a cross will kill them, then it won't. That's the struggle of making yourself believe. You might think that after doing it once you will be fine to do it again, but it is not that simple. Demons are the easiest thing to identify for organizations. Unlike everything else, we deal with the purely in it for the sport to make you feel pain. So when the case file said most likely a demonic force, I got ready to fight a demon. Guns, knives, and explosives are all useless. Just like that, I stood in front of the site with both Mouse and Trojan. We all had nothing but a cross in our hands. I never believed in religion until I got this job, Mouse said. I don't think there are biblical demons, more like a monster that was born from the idea we have of demons, Trojan replied. Looking at him you'd think he was nothing but a meathead, but he was often very insightful. So you don't believe in an afterlife? Mouse asked. I'd rather there not be one, Trojan said. The site was a mansion, a modern one. Some rich oil tycoon lived there at some point, but he's been missing for some time. His disappearance was investigated by local authorities who were attacked. There was only one survivor. He described what they were fighting as a humanoid constantly shifting his form. Bullets didn't do anything to it. They could move the room around them. It constantly changed the layout of the mansion like it was trying to keep them stuck there. We opened the door and the mansion was beautiful. Marbled floors, several large glass windows couldn't be seen through, and a large gorgeous chandelier. We keep together, we split, it kills us all, I say. You act like we ain't ever killed a demon, Trojan replies. Doesn't matter, this one feels different. Lead the way, Mouse says. I take a marker and begin marking the rooms we go through as we wander the mansion. This paid off. I saw one of the many marks I put on the next rows we went in. We were traveling in a straight line through the room although we'd come back to the room we'd been in. I then traveled backward into the room we had just come from. It was different. It was already shifting rooms and we hadn't even seen it yet. But this proved it had limits. It couldn't add new rooms, just rearranged what was already there. But also proved it was watching us. That made me guess one thing. It was with us in the room. It can shift forms. That doesn't mean it's limited to human forms. I scanned the room where it was. We were in a type of living room. It had something out of place, something that didn't belong. Journal end. At this point, Pepper stopped writing. He was always putting down notes in his journal. He wrote everything down. I asked him once why he did it. Why did he have to document everything? He said someday someone's gonna read it, and maybe my experience can save them. That's the man. He was always thinking of others. It was unusual that he stopped writing. I guess he knew what was coming. From this point on, the events of the day are from my point of view. I had come to the same conclusion that it was in the room with us, and before we could figure out what it could be, I watched as Trojan. No, his real name was Michael Avernatch. I watched as the strongest man I had ever met. The man that seemed unkillable was punctured through the chest right through his heart, and if there was God, he blessed that man, cause not even that could bring him down. He swiped around, pulling the cross from his belt. The end of it was pointed. He shoved it down at the demon. It dodged back, placing itself into the next room. Demons aren't what you think they are. The red humanoid isn't accurate. They're more of a shifting mass of gray goo that can change its shape. This one hid in the shadows of the curtain, perfectly forming in the shape of the shadow. You alright? Pepper asked Trojan. I've had worse, he replied. At first I thought the wound had hit his heart, but it narrowly missed. It didn't seem to affect even as blood poured down his chest. He stood there as if nothing had happened. We went in the direction after it. I've never seen that before, Pepper said. Seen what? I asked. A demon like that. They're smart but not so smart as to shape themselves into a shadow. This one is far beyond anything I've dealt, Pepper said. On top of that, they're not ambush predators. Those things feed on fear, Trojan replied. I'll admit it, in my career I've never met or dealt with a demon, so I'm not very knowledgeable of what they're like, but I got what they were saying. It's not a demon, is it? I said. They didn't answer, but the silence was enough for me. It meant we were even more underpowered than we thought. The one weapon we thought we had, the cross, was useless and was just a knife. It can shift form, it can control the area around us, and its look can be mistaken for what we know as a demon. That left me with one out there theory. It's a copy, I said. Copies are monsters that are ambush predators, and they are devilishly smart. They have a unique trait in that they can take the form of any non-living thing but can take the forms of living things if one condition is met. They have to eat whatever creature they are mimicking, but from there, they can make the noise, they have the looks, and can even take on the memories of the creature they ate. If it ate a demon, it would solve every question but one: how is it shifting the building? Pepper said. My theory didn't account for that, but at the same time, copies aren't necessarily strong creatures, especially compared to demons. A few bullets should take them down, but the police officer said guns were useless. Demons are otherworldly. You think a copy eating one could change its biology, Trojan said. We have no way of killing it. We need to attempt to leave, Pepper said. No, I got a way to kill it, Trojan responded. Pepper looked down like he knew exactly what he meant, but despite my prodding, neither would tell me. We came across it again in the same room where the mansion began, with the beautiful chandelier. It was in its normal form now, what you'd expect a copy to look like. A skinless man running on all fours. When they were in this form, they were much stronger and faster. Trojan squared it up, but instead of fighting, he stood there and let it take him, giving both of us a smile as he did so. The way I wish I could explain how it unhinged its jaws and swallowed him whole. I'd worked with him a few times, and Trojan was always one to fight. He was unnaturally strong and durable. He could take a hit no man could. He gave up. I stood there terrified. No, he gave us a fighting chance, Pepper said. I didn't understand at the time what that meant. It was only after the case was over that I was able to look into Trojan's file. It made sense where his unnatural abilities came from. He was born into a cult that worshipped a large fly-like being they called the One. When he turned 18, he was given as sacrifice to this creature, but instead of willingly dying to it, he chooses to fight. During the fight, he managed to kill it, and the creature's blood mutated his DNA, giving him his intense strength and durability in his blood. That anytime an unexplainable creature took from his blood, they were severely weakened. Pepper never told me this, but it's clear to me now he knew. Just in case you're wondering, after Trojan left the cave of the creatures, he turned on the cult and killed them all. Sometime later, he was found by the organization. His blood was potent. Shortly after he was gone, the creature began to writhe in pain. Pepper took no time to let it recover, charging at it with his crucifix blade. Before he reached it, the creature shifted the room. Suddenly, we were falling toward the ceiling. I landed inches from the chandelier, glass shattered, and I fell among it. It cut into my good arm, making my body even more useless than it already was. At that moment, I thought, I don't know why Pepper brought me. There were better options than me. I tried pressing my feet, but the damage to my body was too much. I was losing a lot of blood, focused on attempting to stop the more dangerous holes. I looked over to see Pepper, more cut than I, but he wasn't deterred. He held a piece of the shattered chandelier. The copy was much more weakened than I previously thought. He fell to the ceiling with us and was cut by the shattered glass of the chandelier, but it wasn't moving. Pepper took the glass, standing over it. He stabbed the glass straight into the creature's head. Just at the moment, the glass met with the head of the copy. It turned its hand into the same blade that stabbed Trojan, but unlike Trojan, it didn't miss the heart. It all happened in a second as both of them stabbed each other. Unable to move my legs, I crawled to him, desperately clinging to the hope I could save my friend. He fell to his back. I made it to him. I took my phone, calling for backup, telling him it'd all be okay, someone was gonna save him. He grabbed my hand and stared at me, and at that moment I knew he didn't want to be saved. I tried to hold back tears as he told me, "Don't worry, I got some people waiting for me." At that moment, Ken Dean Olsen, otherwise known as Pepper, was dead. I wouldn't bother trying to figure out anything about him. As far as I could tell, the organization already scrubbed him from all records. A ceremony was held for him and Trojan, and it was a lot for everyone who knew them. I was given the option to retire after it all. It is a rare honor one I don't think I deserve, but I took it. I plan on taking a trip thinking maybe to Ireland. I wanted to tell you his final story, cause I know he wanted people to know about this underground world. I miss him. It's not been long, but I don't think that will go away. I hope wherever he is he's happy, and I hope he got to see his wife and his friend once again.